Senga leaped into the chaos with breathtaking speed. Her movements were swift, like an arrow shot from a tightly drawn bow. The people below could barely keep up with her presence. Only the shifting blur of her shadow gave any hint of where she moved. In her hands, her daggers gleamed as she unsheathed them in one fluid motion. Then, she dropped from above at a terrifying pace. Before the enemies could react, they found themselves ensnared by thin, glowing threads that seemed to appear out of nowhere. These threads coiled around their necks and limbs, paralyzing them in a web of shimmering danger. Panic spread across their faces as they realized they were already caught, their eyes darting to each other with horror. Without a second's hesitation, Senga gripped the ends of the threads and yanked them hard. The threads sliced cleanly through the mass of enemies, and within an instant, bodies collapsed. Heads rolled, limbs fell. The once threatening crowd was reduced to a pile of severed flesh and stunned silence. Crimson blood sprayed across the battlefield, painting the scene in a violent, unforgettable red. From a distance, Dokja and his companions stood frozen. What they had just witnessed was something far beyond what they remembered of Senga. Her calm grace was still there, but it was now paired with deadly precision and terrifying strength. Dokja's thoughts churned in disbelief. He had known her for a long time, but the person in front of him seemed almost unrecognizable. Her power, her confidence, everything had changed. He couldn't understand how she had grown so strong in such a short time. Jungyuk, watching beside him, spoke through Midday Rendezvous. He pointed out how Senga had grown stronger quickly in Dokja's absence, hinting that maybe Dokja wasn't good at helping his companions improve. He even compared it to Hyunsung, who had also grown faster after Dokja left. Dokja replied calmly, reminding him that it was because of his early guidance that Senga even had a chance to become this strong. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the frustration. Watching her now, fighting so powerfully without him, made him feel like he had been left behind. A part of him wondered if his presence had ever been necessary at all. As Senga continued to wipe out the remaining enemies with her daggers, Dokja finally called her name. She halted instantly. The sound of his voice cut through the noise of battle. She turned, eyes wide with surprise. Her lips began to form a question, but before she could speak further, Dokja stopped her. There was no time for reunion or emotion. He simply told her they would talk after escaping from this battlefield. Junghyuk gave a sharp command to head toward the high-rise building in the distance. He wanted them to secure higher ground to observe the area better. Dokja quickly caught on and shouted to the others, urging them to follow the instruction without delay. Just as he turned to move, Junghyuk added a warning. He told Dokja to be careful around that woman. Dokja paused for a second. His thoughts were scattered. He wondered who Junghyuk meant. There were two of them, so which one was he supposed to watch out for? But Junghyuk didn't say anything else. The moment passed, and they all rushed into a nearby high-rise building to hide. Monsters poured into the area shortly after they entered the building. The sudden chaos from earlier had drawn them in. Their timing had been close. Too close. But after a short while, the monsters gave up and retreated back into Inner Gangdong. The group had escaped just in time. Inside the building, Dokja turned to Sanga. She looked slightly worn, but still calm. He asked if she was alright. Sanga responded that she was fine and asked about him. He nodded back, saying he was okay too. For a moment, the two stood there in silence. It felt strange. Only a few days had passed since they had separated, yet the atmosphere between them was awkward. Dokja's eyes shifted to Senga again. He noticed that she was now well equipped, wearing proper gear, as if she had been through several battles already. Her movements were composed, and she looked more confident than before. Senga glanced over at Junghyuk, who was still recovering in silence. Then she turned back to Dokja, calmly commenting that he seemed to have gone through a lot as well. Dokja nodded. He couldn't argue with that. Senga then explained what had happened to her. When she woke up after being transported, she had found herself in Gangdong-gu with Gong Pildu. Dokja was visibly surprised. Pildu was the last person he expected to hear about, but Senga continued, saying Pildu had helped her a lot. Those words hit Dokja unexpectedly. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. She called Pildu by name, so casually, so comfortably. That told Dokja everything. In the few days they had been apart, Senga and Pildu had grown closer. Dokja asked about Gong Pildu's whereabouts, and Senga explained that they had gotten separated during a fight with the Gangdong-gu group. Pildu had tried to save her, and in doing so, he had drawn the enemies away toward the Han River. Her voice fell as she recalled the moment, her eyes lowering in guilt and sadness. Dokja was stunned for a moment. It was hard to believe that someone like Pildu, once known as one of the 10 evils, would risk his life to save another. But then, Dokja remembered something important. The contract with the defense master was still intact. That meant Pildu should still be alive. If he were dead, Dokja would have noticed the consequences of the contract. So deep down, he was sure Pildu had survived. Dokja reassured Senga that Pildu would be fine. Hearing that, a look of relief appeared on Senga's face, even if only briefly. Then Dokja asked about her new gear, the combat knife and the upgraded clothing. Senga hesitated slightly and then told him about how she had stumbled upon a green meteorite after getting separated. It had granted her those rare items. But Dokja's thoughts churned immediately. A green meteorite wasn't just any event, it was something rare that often contained powerful loot. The fact that she encountered encountered one so early meant she had been extremely lucky. Dokja couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy. He knew just how valuable those items were. Suddenly, Soo-young stepped in, her tone suspicious. She questioned whether Senga was telling the whole truth. According to Soo-young, there was no way those items alone could have made someone that strong so quickly, not even with special growth packages. She demanded to know who Senga's supporting constellation was, and how she had managed to level up her skills so rapidly. Her tone was sharp and probing. Senga was taken aback. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she was silent. But when Soo-young revealed her identity as the first disciple, it hit Senga like a storm. Memories she had buried deep resurfaced in an instant. Senga was pulled back to the horror at Chungmuro Station. She remembered the mass slaughter, the blood, the terror. Soo-young and her companions had killed countless innocents without mercy, and now that same person was standing in front of her, smiling without a hint of remorse. Rage consumed Senga. She didn't hesitate. She unsheathed her daggers, her hands trembling with fury. The urge for justice, or vengeance, took over. She was ready to strike, but before she could move, Dokja shouted for her to stop. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Senga turned to him, disbelief and anger burning in her eyes. She demanded to know why he was defending Soo-young. To her, it looked like the two had become allies. Dokja tried to explain, saying it wasn't like that, but Senga wasn't convinced. Her voice was shaking now, not from fear, but from fury and betrayal. She reminded Dokja of what Soo-young had done at Chungmuro, of the bloodbath she caused, of the innocent lives she ended, and now Dokja wanted her to look past that. Dokja quietly observed the tension growing between Senga and Soo-young. His thoughts drifted to the past. He remembered clearly how Senga had become the second in command of the Chungmuro group when he was away. She wasn't just a figure of leadership, she had grown deeply attached to the members of that group. Soo-young, however, seemed completely unfazed. She looked at Senga with curiosity and mock amusement. Then she turned toward Dokja, tossing careless words his way. She admitted her own faults without hesitation, but urged Dokja to judge wisely. She implied that Senga was hiding something important. Senga clenched her teeth, barely able to contain her rising anger. But Soo-young wasn't finished. She brought up Chungmuro again, claiming that Senga hadn't been nearly as strong back then. Her sudden growth felt unnatural. Even with a powerful constellation, the leap in strength didn't make sense. Soo-young speculated further. If Senga had an SSS-grade growth skill, it might explain things, but skills of that level were exceedingly rare. Almost no constellation, especially within Korea, had the power to provide something like that. Dokja didn't want to agree. He wanted to believe in Senga completely, but part of him hesitated. When he saw her skillfully using the magic thread earlier, he had assumed her supporting constellation was Ariadne, the lover of the abandoned labyrinth. It would explain the thread, but there was one problem. Ariadne wasn't powerful enough to make someone grow at this speed. Worse still, the way Senga moved reminded him of the stigma known as Hermes' stroll. But if she really was connected to Ariadne, then she shouldn't be able to use Hermes' power. The contradictions were impossible to ignore. Before he could think further, a voice cut through his thoughts. The air shifted. A strange energy sparked around them. It was a playful, eerie voice, yet dangerous underneath. It welcomed everyone with sarcasm, commenting on how the participants were getting too excited even though the next scenario hadn't started yet. The voice belonged to one of the dokkaebis, and it mocked their impatience. He explained that since the dokkaebi originally in charge was absent, he had considered taking it easy, but the situation had changed. Dokja looked toward the sky, and his eyes widened in alarm. Sparks burst through the air as waves of energy crackled and tore through the surroundings. A group of dokkaebis appeared out of the rift. Beyong was among them, alongside the mid-level dokkaebi and two others. One of them stood out. He was clearly the one in charge. Dogak. Dogak continued his announcement with theatrical flair, saying that since everyone was so eager, how could he call himself a dokkaebi and not grant their wish? A moment later, the message they had feared appeared. A new sub-scenario had been triggered. Stop the catastrophe. The mission was clear. A mysterious group from Gangdong-gu was trying to awaken one of the catastrophes. The goal was to stop them before it was too late. Dokja's heart pounded as realization struck him. His fears had come true. The catastrophes were close to hatching. The sudden announcement of the sub-scenario confirmed everything. If their group was given the mission to stop the catastrophe, then it was likely that the Poison Beauties group had been given the exact opposite mission, to protect the catastrophe. Time was against them. Without wasting another second, Dokja turned to Senga and Soo-young. He knew this wasn't the moment for petty conflicts or suspicions. They needed unity now more than ever. He quickly laid out the situation. The sub-scenario had a time limit of 2 hours. That meant the catastrophe would be born in exactly 2 hours if they failed. Their first priority had to be stopping it. Dokja explained that the Poison Beauties group was based in the Cheonho-dong area within Gangdong-gu. The area was full of churches and cathedrals, making it difficult terrain and ideal for defending a secret location. However, the northern and northeastern zones near Cheonjong-ro were less terraformed. That route would be their best chance to reach the enemy base quickly. He warned them that it would be heavily guarded, but it was still their best shot. He instructed Senga and Soo-young to lead the the front. Although tensions remained between them, he asked them to put their differences aside, at least for now. Their teamwork would be vital. Without hesitation, Senga and Soo-young nodded in sync. They both stepped forward and jumped off the edge of the high-rise building. Their descent was graceful, almost cinematic, as they landed on the ground with perfect precision. The enemy group, the Poison Beauty's people, were caught off guard by the sudden arrival. In that moment of confusion, Dokja followed, sliding swiftly from the rooftop and joining the battle. Soo-young immediately activated her skill. Avatar, illusions of her appeared across the road, each one lifelike and fast. Dozens of these avatars rushed forward, drawing the attention of the enemy. The enemy group panicked, thinking they were under full attack. They chased the avatars down the street, not realizing it was a trap. Then, without warning, the battlefield was filled with nearly invisible threads. Senga had acted. Thin, deadly threads stretched across the path, slicing through legs as the enemies ran through. Screams erupted. Some fell instantly, only to be struck again. A second thread, carefully placed below, activated as bodies hit the ground. Heads flew into the air. It was a cruel and precise trap, crafted to kill without mercy. The ground became soaked in blood. Even Soo-young was taken aback by the ruthlessness of the execution. But Senga didn't back down. Despite the brief exchange between them, they pressed forward without hesitation. Watching them, Dokja couldn't help but reflect. These two, Soo-young and Senga, made an unexpectedly powerful team. They constantly spoke as if they disliked each other, but in battle, their synergy was undeniable. Together, they carved a path of destruction. Thanks to the support from Senga and Soo-young, Dokja was able to infiltrate deep into the enemy base without alerting their guards. Moving quietly and carefully, he avoided detection and navigated through the buildings. It didn't take long before he reached the very heart of the base. At the center stood an enormous meteorite, towering over 8 meters in height. It radiated a dark and eerie aura, as if its presence alone could announce the coming of disaster. Just being near it filled the air with tension. It was clear that this was the source of the catastrophe. Beside the meteorite stood a woman with snow-white hair. Her appearance was striking. Her pale skin contrasted with lips as red as blooming flowers against a snowy mountain. Her presence was cold and commanding. The sharpness in her glassy eyes revealed a dangerous spirit hiding beneath her calm expression. This was one of the 10 evils, Poisoner Solwa. As she stood protectively beside the meteorite, Dokja quickly assessed the situation in his mind. There were 3 ways the meteorite could hatch. The first was to wait for the natural countdown of the scenario to complete. The second was to use the meteorite's power, borrowing from it. But the third, and the fastest, was to fill the meteorite with mana directly, a method known as the hatching ceremony. The ritual called the Prayer of the Lost released tiny amounts of mana. Now he understood why Solwa had chosen this specific location. The surrounding area was packed with churches and religious buildings. It was the perfect environment to collect mana from the desperate prayers of survivors. By doing this, she was accelerating the disaster's birth using the spiritual energy of people. Dokja stepped forward, his voice firm and his blade ready. He warned her that continuing the ritual would lead only to death. But one of the members of Solwa's group stepped forward, hostile and defensive. Dokja, still calm, questioned her reasoning. In the 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, during the 3rd regression, Solwa had used the power of the meteorite but never dared to hatch it early. She had never gone this far. Perhaps that was why Junghyuk had tried to stop her before. But Solwa only responded with scorn. She mocked Dokja's warning and made it clear she wouldn't stop. Dokja unsheathed his blade without hesitation. If she continued, she would die here. Her eyes narrowed and she smiled with contempt. With a small movement of her hand, the people who had been kneeling in prayer toward the meteorite suddenly turned their attention to Dokja. Their bodies began to twist and change. Antennae burst out from their heads, and their hands mutated into sharp rake-like claws. These people were no longer human. They weren't wolves either. They had turned into something else entirely. Insect men. Dokja's eyes narrowed. This was wrong. The meteorite was powerful, yes, but it shouldn't have the ability to mutate people like this. Dokja activated the Blade of Faith, and the ether effics embedded in the sword changed to fire. In an instant, flames tore through the air, swirling with heat and light. The lower humans, those who had been twisted into insect-like beings, were vulnerable to fire. It was their greatest weakness. The ether flames of the weapon, Unbroken Faith, clung to their mutated skin and ignited them like dry kindling. Screeches rang out as the flames engulfed them. Dokja showed no hesitation. He slashed through their limbs, cutting off legs and tearing wings from their backs. As his blade moved, magical energy surged with each strike, incinerating his enemies in bursts of fire. One by one, the lower humans fell, their twisted bodies reduced to ash. Through the blazing heat and chaos, Dokja charged toward Poisoner Solwa, but this time, his sword did not cut through cleanly. For the first time, Unbroken Faith was blocked. Solwa's arms, glowing with a dark and sinister light, deflected his attack. Her fingernails were sharpened like weapons, and her entire forearm radiated the power of something unnatural. Still, the clash sent sparks flying. The force of Dokja's strike pushed her backward, her feet sliding against the ground. Even though she she resist it, damage had been done. Dokja didn't stop. He warned her that awakening the catastrophe would serve no purpose, not even for her. There was no penalty in this scenario for failing to hatch it, so continuing only meant destruction. Solwa turned her head slightly and looked at the meteorite. Immediately, Dokja's instincts screamed that something was wrong. She didn't look like someone trying to control the catastrophe. She looked like someone determined to wake it at any cost. And if that meteorite hatched, Sol would be wiped out. Even those unfamiliar with the original storyline could sense the danger. Dokja didn't waste time. He accessed her character profile, Solwa, 26 years old, sponsored by the Guam Divine Doctor. But one detail stood out more than anything else. She was infected. A parasite had taken root inside her body and was now controlling her. Dokja's thoughts raced. He had hoped it wouldn't be this, but it was. The parasites were one of the 5 dominant species in the world of Kronos. Along with them were the Velkia in the east, the Immuntar in the south, the Mystilan in the north, and the Inba at the center. The 5th scenario was born from the collapse of that world, Kronos. On the day of its destruction, each of the 5 ruling species had chosen a single hero, someone to carry their legacy. These chosen ones were sent away through a contract with the Star Stream. In return for surviving the fall of their own worlds, they were tasked with helping others fight against incoming catastrophes. These chosen beings were known as guides. A strange, non-human cry echoed from Solwa's mouth. The sound no longer belonged to a human. Her voice was filled with something alien, something ancient. The being inside her had awakened completely. Dokja didn't flinch. He already knew what had taken over her. The one inside her was no longer Solwa. It was the parasite queen, Antinous. She was no longer a guide. She was now something else, something dangerous. Her mission had been twisted. Her appearance started to change. Her human features melted away, replaced by something monstrous. Her eyes glowed like burning coals. Her jaw clenched, and her teeth sharpened into fangs. Her entire form radiated hostility and power. Dokja held firm. He confronted her, questioning her actions. She had been the one to mutate the people into insect-like lower humans. He demanded to know her reasons. Why was she doing this? Why would a guide meant to help protect the world awaken the catastrophe early? The guides were chosen to fight alongside humans, to build a future with them, not to destroy it. But there was no answer. Only rage. The parasite queen leaped forward, claws stretched out. She struck with deadly force. Dokja blocked the attack with his sword, the sharp clang of metal against claws echoing through the battlefield. In the next moment, Dokja grabbed her by the collar. His grip was unyielding. He questioned her again. The parasite species had worked hard to terraform this world, to prepare it for survival. Then why destroy it now? What had changed? Without hesitation, he threw her across the space. Her body shot through the air like a projectile, crashing into the wall with a heavy thud. Blood spilled from her mouth. The parasite queen gasped in disbelief. A mere human had done this to her. Dokja stepped closer. He reminded her of the mission, the true mission. She was supposed to protect this world, not ruin it. He urged her to abandon the body she had possessed. If any part of Antinous, the original guide, still remained, this was her last chance. Deep inside, Dokja remembered the story. In 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, the 10 evils had fallen under the control of Poison Beauty and joined the parasites. But if Solwa could be freed from the infection, then he wouldn't have to kill her. There was still hope. But then, a message appeared in the air. It was from the Midday Rendezvous. Junghyuk's message was direct. He told Dokja to kill her. Dokja's eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. Junghyuk followed up with another message. He made it clear Solwa's life wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the survival of the world, and Dokja had to make a choice. Dokja asked again, but Junghyuk showed no concern. He acted indifferent. Yet Dokja knew the truth. Junghyuk was pretending not to care. But if Solwa died here, the cost wouldn't just be physical, it would be emotional. The loss of another person he once knew would eat away his memories. One day, the burden of losing so many would cause him to collapse from within. The parasite queen's glare was deadly. Her killing intent was clear. She wanted Dokja dead. Suddenly, a black liquid began pouring from Solwa's body. It was the Thousand Spirits poison, an extremely dangerous toxin. The deadly poison flowed through her veins, leaking out through her fingernails. In the next moment, she charged forward with terrifying speed. Her monstrous claws slashed through the air toward Dokja. One of her claws grazed his finger, and black smoke immediately rose from the wound. The poison had entered him. From the Midday Rendezvous, Junghyuk sent a message asking if Dokja had a countermeasure against the Thousand Spirits poison. Dokja confirmed that he did. Without hesitation, Dokja took a step forward. His voice was firm as he addressed the being inside Solwa. He revealed that the parasite had infected someone it it shouldn't have, someone it didn't understand. There was no way the Parasite Queen could have known the true identity and background of her host. Dokja pulled out a book. It was the dokkaebi, a powerful medical text and artifact. This book had the power to block and cleanse poisons. He activated its hidden effect. He reflected on the effort it had taken to complete this item. During the king's qualification scenario, when all the kings were chasing after the 4-yin demon decapitator, he had used that chaos to collect several rare items. Dokkaebi was not an ordinary item, it was a constellation artifact. It required 25 chapters to complete, but even with only 8 chapters, Dokja had managed to activate a powerful effect linked to the S-grade detox bead. The Parasite Queen faltered. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This wasn't supposed to be possible. This wasn't supposed to work on the Thousand Spirits poison. But Dokja explained the truth. The detox bead alone couldn't remove the poison, but dokkaebi could. That was because both the poison and the book shared the same origin. The creator of the Thousand Spirits poison was none other than divine Dr. Guam Junheo, the same constellation who had written dokkaebi. The book itself was a record of Junheo's failed experiments in perfecting the very same poison. The poison currently flowing from Solwa's body wasn't a natural infection. It was never intended to be used this way. It was the result of twisted evolution, something far from Junheo's original intent. Which meant one thing, Solwa wasn't attacking on her own will. Looking at her, Dokja gave her a chance. He urged her to leave the parasite behind. She could still return to who she once was, a guide, someone meant to teach and help others survive. She still had the potential to live with people, to share knowledge, and maybe even one day rise to become a constellation herself. But Solwa's voice trembled with emotion. The hatred inside her hadn't disappeared completely. Dokja stood still as Solwa Lee, a woman once revered for her healing hands, now stood twisted by hatred, the remnants of her broken world festering within her. The pain of loss had consumed her reason. Her body moved with fury, but her heart was already shattered. She charged toward him like a beast unchained, her scream tearing through the air, a declaration of death, not justice. But Dokja did not flinch. He moved, not with aggression, but with precision born of necessity. In a blur, he slipped past her assault, his feet pivoting softly on the ruined earth as he appeared behind her. Before she could register the shift in distance, his hand seized her wrist with cold efficiency. Her body tensed, her eyes widened. The gap between their strength was undeniable. Dokja did not hesitate. He had long known that this confrontation would come, and he had prepared, not to kill, but to save. His fingers moved quickly, jabbing pressure points across Solwa's body with the knowledge passed down from the incomplete dokkaebi. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't painless. His touch brought agony. With every strike of his fingers, her body convulsed. Her screams echoed like a wild animal caught in a trap. She fell to her knees, then to the earth, thrashing violently. He continued without mercy. This was not punishment. It was surgery. Her screams were not signs of defeat, but of something being ripped from deep within her. She howled louder as her body betrayed her, retching violently. Blackened bile and foreign fluid spilled from her mouth as the parasite that had taken hold of her mind and heart began to expel itself. Her cries shifted from distorted, inhuman screeches to something closer to her original voice, hoarse, trembling, alive. Above her, Dokja remained composed. In his periphery, a message floated gently into view. The constellation known as the Guam Divine Doctor had been watching all along and now observed him not with scrutiny, but with a quiet, approving warmth. The old medicine had worked. Solwa lay in the dirt, her soul in fragments, trying to hold on to her fading thoughts. She asked who he was. Dokja answered with quiet certainty. He told her he had been sent by Junghyuk. That name echoed through the air like something foreign. At that very moment, a message window flickered into. Junghyuk Yu had sent a brief, direct command not to do anything reckless. Dokja turned back to the woman, her body still curled on the ground, caught between sickness and salvation. He spoke again, softly, without expectation. He told her she would understand soon. Dokja silently acknowledged the weight of it. The parasitic madness had been burned out through agony, and now the woman once known as the Sage of Medicine could return, not just as a survivor, but as a companion, not just someone who could join Junghyuk's group, but someone who must. The chaos was still raging when Dokja turned toward the distant shout. Soyoung and Senga were approaching, their figures visible through the smoke and shattered terrain. Both of them had already cleared the path behind them, neutralizing the threats with impressive speed and coordination. Dokja was momentarily taken aback. Together, they had managed to sweep through a horde of infected survivors, bringing some level of control back to the situation, but there was no time to dwell on their success. Near him, the grotesque mass of mucus that had been forced out of Solwa Lee's body began to shift. The shapeless ooze floated upward, reforming in the air. In an instant, it gathered into a dense, pulsating orb. From within it, something ancient and malignant reawakened. It was the true form of Antinous, the parasite queen. Dokja realized immediately that the real battle had only just begun. Without hesitation, he warned the others to keep their distance. Any exposure to her now could mean infection. Suddenly her body moved. Her tail lashed through the air like a bolt of lightning. The pointed end snapped forward, aiming directly at Dokja's gut. He tried to block it, and his hand shot up instinctively, grabbing the sharp tail mid-strike. But even then, it pierced through. A burning pain bloomed across his chest. The blow had landed. His thoughts raced through the pain. She was faster than he expected. Even with his agility score above 50, he couldn't dodge in time. That alone told him the difference in their power. Antinous, even with her world long destroyed, had once been a protector there. A hero. Her strength was on par with some of the strongest beings he'd seen, maybe even equal to Lycan himself. She didn't stop. She used the connection, the fact that he was holding her tail, to propel herself forward. Her body launched toward him and collided with brutal force. The impact threw him backward. He crashed onto the ground, the earth cracking beneath him. His vision pulsed with white light as pain surged through every joint and muscle. Still, Dokja clenched his jaw and pushed through the pain. He didn't need to defeat her, only to buy time. He reminded himself of the rules. Antinous wasn't supposed to act like this. The scenario hadn't ended, and her actions violated the plausibility of the narrative. She was breaking the rules, ignoring the structure that bound them all. If she kept going like this, she wouldn't be able to withstand what came after. Even she couldn't ignore the weight of the system forever. And then he felt it. The pendant around his neck, the protection symbol of the Immuntar, began to pulse. A deep tremor moved through it, shaking against his chest. He remembered, of course. That power still remained. With effort, he lifted his broken body from the dust. His hand clutched the pendant, and he acknowledged what must be done. He wasn't meant to be her opponent. This wasn't his fight to finish. The sky tore open with a sonic boom. A flash of silver light ripped through the clouds. From above, a massive figure descended, wrapped in a wild mane of radiant fur. The air howled in its wake. With a tremendous roar, it struck the ground before Dokja like a meteor, landing on 4 limbs before rising slowly with regality. It was Lycan, Prince of the Immuntar. He radiated nobility, the air around him crackling with power and weight. The prince knelt before Dokja in recognition. Then he turned to face the reborn parasite queen. The two ancient beings stared at each other, remnants of a past long buried. The queen recognized him at once. Her laughter was sharp and mocking, dripping with decay. Lycan didn't falter. He stepped forward, demanding answers. He questioned her intent. Why had she turned against the humans? Why was she destroying instead of guiding? The queen mocked him again, pretending to forget her duties. Her words dripped with venom and disinterest. The idea of a mission meant nothing to her now, but Lycan's fury rose. He remembered everything. The oaths sworn by the warriors of Kronos, the destruction of the 5 ruling species, the blood that had been spilled so that life might continue. Somewhere, somehow. He reminded her of their purpose. They had been chosen as guides to the new worlds, protectors meant to prepare other civilizations for the disasters to come. They were not supposed to dominate. They were meant to lead with wisdom and sacrifice. The queen had strayed from that path, but Lycan had not, and now he would stop her. Inside Dokja's mind, a clear truth echoed. The so-called guides, those who claimed to help humanity, had another purpose. Their real goal was to weaken Earth. They wanted to rebuild their fallen world, and Earth was just a means to that end. To them, Earth wasn't a world to protect, it was a foundation to destroy and reshape for their own benefit. Antinous, consumed by fury, snapped back with anger. She accused Lycan of hypocrisy. If he truly wanted to help Earth, why didn't he oppose its selection as the next battleground for catastrophes? Why had he stayed silent while Earth was marked for destruction? Su-young stood nearby confused. The argument between the alien beings and Dokja made little sense to her. She didn't understand their talk of other worlds and vengeance. But Dokja didn't respond. He remained still and silent. Antinous turned her rage toward Lycan. She shouted that they were the same, beings who had come to this planet out of vengeance. She declared that she was here to make those who ruined Kronos pay in blood. But Lycan didn't waver. He warned her that she would die if she continued like this. The Starstream's rule of plausibility wouldn't allow her to run wild unchecked. Antinous didn't care. She screamed that the version of her Lycan once knew had perished long ago, along with the other parasites of their destroyed homeworld. Lycan gritted his teeth. He could see that Antinous didn't understand the truth, but Antinous only laughed. She mocked Lycan, reminding him of their world's brutal history. The insects of Kronos had never lost to the wolves. She called him pitiful, just another immune avatar trying to act noble. Lycan's voice was firm. He was no longer the wolf she once knew. Antinous laughed again, filled with madness. She wanted to see with her own eyes just how much Lycan had changed. In an instant, she launched herself like a missile toward Lycan. Her body tore through the air at extreme speed. Her skill, Mantinus Break, activated. Sharp scythe-like energy exploded forward. The atmosphere split with a horrible noise as she slammed into the barrier, but Lycan was faster. Before her blow could land, Lycan moved. His body flowed like the wind, slipping past her attacks with perfect timing. Antinous continued her assault, darting in and out with her deadly scythes, but not a single strike touched him. Lycan's movement was impossible to follow. Every swing missed, every blow passed through air. His skill, Way of the Wind, created an air barrier that clashed with the force of Antinous' tail. Sparks burst in the air. A tearing sound rang out as their powers collided, like ripping leather in the wind. Senga, stunned by what she was seeing, wondered aloud what kind of skill Lycan was using. She guessed it might be some form of instant acceleration, but Dokja knew the truth. This was not a simple speed technique. This was Way of the Wind, a sacred art passed down by the wolves of Kronos. Inside Dokja's thoughts, a desire began to form. The Way of the Wind, a skill used not just for movement, but also for dodging and attacking. If he could master it, he wouldn't need other complicated abilities. It was efficient, fast, and powerful. Watching Lycan use it with such ease made Dokja realize how valuable it was. At first glance, it seemed like Lycan and Antinous were simply moving at extreme speed, but that wasn't the case. It was Lycan's skill. The atmosphere itself bent to his will. Every movement he made shaped the wind around him. Antinous noticed it too. The wind was interfering with her path, pushing back at her, throwing off her rhythm. Then, Lycan unleashed his full power. With a furious roar, he called upon the strength of the wind itself. Sharp gusts tore through the air, shredding Antinous' wings. A sudden kick, accelerated by the wind, struck her hard in the abdomen. The blow smashed into the upper part of her armored shell, and her scream rang out across the battlefield. Antinous spiraled through the air, half of her wings torn off. She crashed to the ground in pain, while Lycan landed perfectly without a single wound. Antinous crawled up slowly, gritting her teeth in rage. Her body was trembling, not just from the injury, but from the rising cost of her actions. Dokja observed her closely. Even for someone like Antinous, a legendary hero from Kronos, it would be almost impossible to fight Lycan while also enduring the punishment of violating the Starstream's rule of plausibility. That law did not forgive those who bent narrative too far, and Antinous had crossed the line, but Antinous wasn't ready to fall. With her voice full of fury, she screamed in defiance. The signs of a probability storm were becoming more intense on her body, growing stronger as she rushed toward the meteorite. A deadly plan now in motion. Dokja was already running when he heard Junghyuk's voice urging him to kill her. At the same time, Lycan shouted out that Antinous was trying to inject the last of her mana into the disaster meteorite. Antinous, desperate and wild, charged toward the object that could bring the scenario to ruin. She was thinking of her people, her fallen world, her lost race. To her, this was revenge, an answer to the destruction of Kronos. With all the magic left in her body, she fired a devastating stream of power toward the meteorite. Dokja moved fast. He drew his weapon and activated the Blade of Faith, its fire property glowing bright. While Lycan ran to block the magic power, Dokja closed in. With a clean swing, he slashed at Antinous' neck. Blood splashed from the wound. At the same moment, Lycan used the Way of the Wind to grab Antinous' tail, trying to stop her from reaching the meteorite. But it was too late. The explosion came immediately. Light burst from the meteorite and a massive sonic boom swept across the battlefield. Dokja was hit by the shockwave. One of the meteorite's burning fragments struck his head, shaking his entire world. The ground split, space itself trembled, and Lycan was thrown into the air from the force. Antinous' actions had triggered the disaster. The guide system couldn't hold. The world couldn't carry the weight of such a catastrophe. It had gone beyond the point of control. The balance of the scenario broke completely. And then, the notifications began to appear, cold and final that they had failed to clear the scenario. Dokja's vision turned black as the force of the explosion buried him under heavy fragments of shattered buildings. The world around him had gone silent, and for a moment, everything felt distant and numb. As his consciousness started to return, a familiar voice broke through the noise. It was Junghyuk. His voice echoed with urgency, calling for Dokja to wake up and act before it was too late. The disaster was still ongoing, and there was still a chance to stop it. Nearby, Senga had braced herself from the impact. She was shaken and disoriented, scanning the surroundings for any sign of Dokja. But before she could locate him, her eyes caught sight of someone else rising from the rubble. It was a boy, only a dozen steps away. He appeared to be a high school student, completely naked, not even a single piece of cloth on him. The boy looked around, confused yet oddly calm, as if trying to process where he was. He stretched his arms, almost as though waking from a long dream, and slowly took in the destroyed scene around him. At that moment, Dokja finally emerged from the debris. So-young, stunned, turned toward him, completely unprepared for what she was witnessing. Then came the cold mechanical sound of system notifications. The catastrophe, penalty, known as the catastrophe of questions, had been weakened. It had hatched before its intended time. But despite that, the penalty was handed not to the catastrophe, but to Dokja. For the next 3 minutes, he was forbidden from attacking it. Frustration surged through him. It didn't make sense. They were being punished, not the disaster itself. Dokja clenched his teeth, knowing those precious minutes could mean the difference between survival and destruction. He realized one truth with certainty. They needed to eliminate this being as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the boy who had just awakened from the rubble was slowly walking toward a nearby survivor. She was one of the members from the poisoners group, visibly confused and trying to recover from the chaos. The boy approached her casually, as if none of this destruction mattered. His voice was clear, and he began speaking to her like they were in the middle of a peaceful street. Dokja wanted to scream out a warning. He knew what was happening. The boy's question wasn't harmless. Nothing about this moment was, the woman should not respond, but Dokja's voice wouldn't come. His mouth moved, but no sound followed. Still unaware of the danger, the woman tried to respond to the boy. Her voice was hesitant, uncertain. Then, as she unknowingly answered, the system reacted. A message appeared. The first question has been resolved. The first seal of the returnee, Myung Il-sang, has been released. Everything shifted in that moment. Il-sung burst into laughter. His expression turned twisted, full of bitterness and rage. His emotions poured out as he spoke. He began to recount the unimaginable suffering he had endured. He had lived for a full century alone, trapped in another dimension, the only human in a world filled with horrors. He had seen creatures unlike anything on Earth, monstrous insects, feral werewolves, unnatural birdmen, and through it all, he had survived. Il-sung, standing barefoot amidst the debris, tilted his head and asked another question. He looked calm, almost cheerful, as he faced the confused woman in front of him. He gave her a strange choice between insects, wolves, and birds. He wanted to know which one she thought was the best. The woman trembled, her voice shaking as she asked what he meant. She didn't understand the question, and fear tightened around her like a noose. But the boy only laughed harder. His next question came swiftly. He asked which of the three she thought would taste the best. The woman's eyes widened in horror. She realized something was wrong, terribly wrong. Pleading for her life, she begged him not to kill her. Her pleas meant nothing. Without hesitation, the boy stomped his foot directly onto her skull. Her body went limp as her head was crushed, blood splattering across the cracked ground. It was brutal and sudden. Her life ended in an instant. The boy chuckled in satisfaction, as if he had done something entirely natural. He spoke to no one in particular, declaring what he was meant to do next. He spoke of fighting S-grade incarnations, destroying overconfident groups, and tearing through the world like a storm. His eyes gleamed with madness. Then he turned his attention to Senga. In that moment, a system notification echoed. The penalty for his premature awakening had ended. The boy grinned, casually commenting on Senga's appearance, showing no awareness of the horror he had just committed. His presence radiated danger. Senga stood frozen, her heart pounded, her mind racing. Fear wrapped around her like ice, yet she didn't back away. Dokja, still struggling to stand, saw what was happening. His body ached, but he forced himself to rise and shout out to her. Senga, still trembling, managed to speak. She asked the boy who he was. There was no kindness in her tone, only desperation and fear. The boy leaned closer, acting playful. He asked her again if she really wanted to know. He teased her like it was all some harmless game. Inside his mind, Dokja processed everything. The pieces were all coming together. This boy was one of the 5 catastrophes of the 5th scenario. He was the catastrophe that had destroyed Kronos. He was the reason Antinous had turned to rage and hatred, why she wanted Earth to fall. This was the returnee who had once been summoned to Kronos as a hero, the catastrophe of questions. His name was Il-sung Myung. Il-sung demanded an answer once more. He pressed Senga, waiting for her to respond. He mocked her reaction, expecting her to blush or act shy, but Senga did not fit into his expectations. She stood firm and asked him what he was. Her voice held no softness. Dokja shouted again, his voice sharper now. He told her not to respond to any of the boy questions. He knew how dangerous that would be. Senga heard him. She turned to look at Dokja, her eyes full of conflict but still holding her ground. Il-sung grew irritated. He told her to keep her attention on him, not Dokja. He asked if Dokja was her boyfriend, his words dripping with mockery. Then he reached out to touch her, but Senga didn't hesitate. She snapped his hand aside and pushed him away. Il-sung looked at his own hand. It was shaking. Even he seemed surprised by the tremor. Then a system notification appeared. The second seal on the returnee, Il-sang, had been broken. The boy, who looked no older than 17, had just become even more dangerous. Senga didn't waste a moment. She drew her dagger in an instant. Her body tensed, her eyes locked onto Il-sung, prepared to fight. Il-sung's expression twisted with anger. It was as if something had snapped inside him. His gaze turned to Dokja, and hatred filled his face. To Il-sung, Dokja represented everything he had lost. Peace, normalcy, a life that could have been his. Purple particles started swirling around Il-sung's hand. He pointed it at Dokja, the air distorted with power. Then he unleashed one of his deadly abilities, small red red fire cannon, but the attack wasn't small at all. It was the black fire cannon. This was no ordinary skill. It was the same fire that had once scorched the eastern forests of Kronos and incinerated entire insect kings. Flames burst across the area and the entire atmosphere ignited. The heat was unbearable. Dokja's body screamed in pain. The fire licked at his skin and agony ran through every nerve. It hurt terribly, but to his surprise, it wasn't as overwhelming as he expected. This was supposed to be the fire that made even monarch-level insects tremble, and yet he was still standing. While the flames roared, Senga made her move. She charged at Ilsung with her daggers, slicing through the air with incredible precision. Ilsung, overwhelmed by her speed, was forced to dodge backward. His attacks lost focus. He was stunned. He couldn't believe someone like her was able to push him this far. He questioned her strength. Maybe she was a returnee too. No, he quickly assumed it was his own power that had weakened. Dokja watched the scene closely. Something didn't add up. Even with 2 broken seals, the catastrophe of questions should have been far stronger. Senga had grown powerful, but she still shouldn't be able to fight on equal ground with a catastrophe. Dokja activated his skill, character profile. The truth was revealed. His name was Ilsung, 17 years old in appearance, but actually 127 years old. All his skills were SSS grade. However, most of his stats were locked. They could only be unlocked through the resolution of his questions. Dokja thought to himself, this was different from what was written in the novel. Ilsung was weaker, far weaker than he should be. Could it be that Byung was interfering? Maybe this was his way of helping. Whatever the reason, this was their chance. He shouted for Suyong and Senga to go all out. This was the time to strike. The 3 of them launched a combined assault. The goal was clear. They needed to kill Ilsung before he regained his full power. Dokja unsheathed his blade and boosted his stats by spending coins. He didn't hold back. The enemy in front of them was too dangerous. He reminded everyone around him of the most important rule. No one should answer Ilsung's questions, not even one. Ilsung's eyes flickered as he noticed Dokja's rising strength. There was a brief hesitation, a crack in his confidence. Dokja didn't wait. He leapt forward, charging with full force. He activated the stigma, sword song. The power of the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare surged through him. The blade became a weapon infused with the memories and words of war. It descended with immense force, aiming straight for Ilsung. Ilsung panicked. The strength of that skill was beyond what he expected. He launched himself forward with a flying kick, landing a brutal strike on Dokja's ribs. The impact rattled through Dokja's body, throwing him back. This was the true nature of the returnees. In 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, they were described as monsters, those who destroyed entire dimensions just to survive. Ilsung was one of them. He was the 2nd-ranked returnee in the novel, and now his path of destruction had reached Earth. Ilsung stood tall, completely unfazed. Instead of retreating or defending, Ilsung responded with mock surprise, as if the attack was a minor annoyance. Dokja coughed up blood, trying to stay upright. His body ached from the earlier strike. The attack had left a deep impact, but he stayed focused. He reminded himself, war isn't always about swords and wounds. Sometimes even a wartime diary carries more than just battles. But that didn't ease the pain. Before Dokja could act further, Suyong stepped forward. She had no time for games. She split herself into dozens of avatars, each one rushing toward Ilsung. Her killing intent was clear. This wasn't a fight to delay him. She wanted him dead. Ilsung, even as he faced a storm of attacks, kept smiling. He stared at Suyong with the same mocking tone. He commented on her appearance, making it clear he saw everything as a joke. His tone turned dramatic, pretending to be hurt and confused by her hostility. He behaved like the victim, like he had done nothing wrong and was unfairly treated. Suyong didn't care for his words. She was furious. Her avatars moved in faster, slashing from all sides. The battlefield was filled with movement, flashing blades, and collapsing terrain. But Ilsung continued dodging, weaving through her attacks with inhuman speed and grace. He kept talking. He tried to guess Suyong's identity. He brought up the Hunters Association, claiming they were always the ones to attack returnees like him. Suyong shouted in frustration, her voice sharp and furious. None of what he said made sense. There was no such thing as a formal fight between returnees and hunters. He was just making things up, twisting everything. Then it happened. A wave of system notifications blinked in everyone's vision, one after another. The 3rd question had been answered, then the 4th, then the 5th. With each resolved question, a seal broke. And now, the 3rd seal on the returnee, Ilsung, had been released. A smile crept onto Ilsung's face. He knew now. Suyong's response, her words, whether she realized it or not, had answered his questions. Her emotions had helped him unlock even more of his power. A massive wave of energy burst out from Ilsung's body. The ground shook. The air rippled violently. Suyong's avatars, once flooding the battlefield, were destroyed instantly. They shattered like glass in the face of his awakened strength. Dokja's heart sank. He watched helplessly as the balance shifted again. This was bad. Terribly bad. Suyong tried to process what was happening, clearly shaken by his sudden shift. Her irritation grew, but Dokja immediately warned her. Any response, even insults, would feed his power. Ilsung didn't need logical answers. He just needed needed engagement. So-young tried to argue, saying she had only cursed at him, not answered anything important. But Dokja reminded her it didn't matter. Even meaningless reactions could act as responses. In this battle, silence was survival. Just then, Senga charged forward. Her dagger flashed through the air and clashed against Ilsang's arm. He blocked it easily with just a flick of his wrist. The impact sent both of them flying back. But Senga wasn't done. She reappeared behind Ilsang in an instant, releasing a powerful killing intent. She activated 3 different skills: Hermes' walking method, Theseus' resolution, and Arachne's web all at once. Dokja's eyes widened in disbelief. These were all stigmas belonging to Olympian constellations. It was impossible for a single incarnation to possess all of them, especially without undergoing a special scenario or event. And Senga, who had never read 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, should not have known how to obtain these. But here she was, moving like someone blessed by multiple gods. A web of energy and thread exploded from her body, wrapping around Ilsang and trapping him in place. For the first time, he looked stunned. At the same moment, So-young's avatar surged toward him, landing a flurry of heavy strikes. Each blow struck with precision. The combined power of the avatars and Senga's restraints overwhelmed Ilsang. Then Senga gave the signal. Dokja rushed in, sword in hand. His blade of faith slashed through Ilsang's shoulder and belly. Blood poured out. The attack had landed cleanly. Ilsang staggered, overwhelmed by the relentless storm of attacks. But then everything changed. Ilsang activated a powerful escape skill, Blink. His body shimmered, distorted, and in the next breath he vanished. Only the blood he left behind confirmed he had been there. The battlefield fell silent. So-young clenched her teeth in frustration. Ilsang had escaped, but Dokja remained calm. He knew they had dealt serious damage. The returnee wouldn't be able to run forever. Then Dokja turned to Senga to compliment her efforts. But she didn't respond. He looked at her closely and realized something was wrong. Theseus' resolution, one of the skills she had used, demanded an enormous toll. It forced the user to draw out all their inner power. Her body had reached its limit. Dokja gently handed Senga over to So-young, who complained aloud, clearly annoyed. She didn't want to carry another unconscious ally, but she didn't argue further. As they moved on, chasing after Ilsang's trail, Dokja remained deep in thought. Senga had used multiple stigmas at full power. Her body had endured something no normal incarnation could survive. In 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, there were rare cases of incarnations who held the blessings of multiple constellations. But if Dokja's guess was right, then Senga was more than just rare. She was something unknown, something impossible. As the group caught their breath, So-young thought aloud, realizing the grim nature of their situation. The enemy they were facing, Myung-il-sung, the catastrophe of questions, grew stronger every time someone responded to him. Every answer helped break another one of his seals. Dokja confirmed her fear. Returnees like Ilsang were far stronger than ordinary incarnations, so to balance their power, they were heavily restricted by seals when they re-entered their world. But once those seals started breaking, the situation could spiral out of control. So-young asked how many seals there were. Dokja didn't have a solid number, but guessed there were dozens. If every seal was broken, they wouldn't stand a chance. The only thing working in their favor was that no new scenario had been activated yet. But if more incarnations arrived, unaware of the cost of answering Ilsang's questions, and they foolishly engaged with him, they'd end up freeing the very disaster they were trying to stop. Just then, the atmosphere shifted. The air cracked with red sparks. A powerful presence descended from above. A high-ranking dokkaebi appeared in the sky, his eyes gleaming with amusement. He praised the group for being able to corner a catastrophe like Ilsang despite the penalties stacked against them. But his tone quickly changed. He accused them of being greedy. According to him, victories like this were meant to be shared. A wave of messages dropped into everyone's system. So-young muttered a curse under her breath as the real consequences of their actions began to unfold. The dokkaebi addressed all the incarnations of Seoul. He delivered unsettling news. Due to the interference caused by certain people, one of the catastrophes had awakened in Gangdong-gu. The crowd panicked. Confused voices filled the air. People demanded to know who was responsible, but the dokkaebi only grinned. He mocked their fear, saying he could hear their whining even from afar. Some were already trying to flee Gangdong-gu, but he warned them not to, because he said this catastrophe was not just a threat, it was an opportunity. He laughed cruelly, his voice carrying across the sky. He described their pitiful lives, how they'd lost everything overnight, how monsters had taken their coins, and how even their friends had become enemies. He reminded them that at least they didn't have to go to work anymore. But now the constellations demanded entertainment in return for survival. Some laughed as they offered coins for ridiculous things, like dancing like a monkey. Laughter from several constellations followed. Dokja clenched his fists. Inside, frustration simmered. The dokkaebi's manner of speech was too calculated, animated, too human. He wasn't a simple low-class broadcast official. He was speaking to individuals, not just the crowd. That made him dangerous. Then the dokkaebi continued, his voice softened, laced with twisted sympathy. He spoke to the ones who had felt helpless since the scenarios began, to those who had tried to start new lives only to realize the game was already rigged against them. He acknowledged the crushing defeat they felt when others with powerful constellations soared ahead, while they were left behind, begging for attention. And then he extended a poisoned hand. He told them that this disaster, this catastrophe, was their chance. A way for the unlucky and broken to flip their fate. A test and a promise. The dokkaebi raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Dokja immediately felt something was off. A deep, familiar suspicion crept into his mind. This dokkaebi, his aura, his tone, wasn't ordinary. Dokja remembered the way mid-level dokkaebis had recently taken over tasks usually managed by the low-level ones. That had seemed strange already, but now, seeing this particular dokkaebi, he understood. This wasn't just any mid-level broadcast agent, this was Dogak, a dokkaebi from one of the major channels, someone who wasn't supposed to be interfering on such a low-tier stage. As Dogak made his move, a giant screen lit up above the battlefield. The image showed a young boy staggering through the streets, wounded but grinning. It was Myung-il-sung. Dogak began his twisted narration. The crowd was told that this boy was not just another returnee. He was a walking SSS-grade item. He had once been chosen by the Starstream and transported to another world. There, he had been granted great power, lived a fantasy life, gained the love of an elf, and became a celebrated hero. Now he had returned, not as a savior, but as a catastrophe. But Dogak didn't call him a disaster. He knew better. He called him a reward, a treasure chest, a golden opportunity. He told the incarnations not to worry. Il-sung's powers were sealed. He might still be strong, but if enough people attacked him, he could be defeated. Soo-young, watching from the side, realized the truth. This dokkaebi was a master manipulator. He didn't want to incite fear. He wanted chaos. Dokja knew it too. If the dokkaebi had simply announced that a catastrophe had awakened, most people would have run away. But by disguising that catastrophe as an opportunity, he had ensured that they would chase it instead. Suddenly, notifications filled the sky. A new sub-scenario had been activated. Defeat the SSS-grade hero, Myung-il-sung. The reward was great, but the punishment for failure was devastating. The total destruction of the Soul Dome. As soon as the scenario was announced, the streets exploded with movement. Groups of incarnations rushed toward Il-sung, screaming and shouting. He stood in the middle of the chaos, calm and smiling. Blood dripped from his wounds, but he didn't seem to care. People shouted angrily at him, asking if he thought this was a game. Il-sung responded casually, almost playfully. He teased them, suggesting that if they were so jealous of his experience in another world, he could send them there too. Some actually believed him. One man shouted that he wanted to go, that anything was better than the hellish life they were living now. Il-sung extended his arm toward the crowd. In that moment, more notifications rang out. The 8th and 9th seals on the returnee Myung-il-sung have been broken. Myung-il-sung stood before the crowd, eyes glinting with a strange calm. He softly whispered a farewell, an eerie goodbye not just to the people, but to any lingering humanity he once had. He didn't care if the other world was better or worse. All that mattered now was sending these people away, just like he had destroyed everything before. Then it happened. The sky lit up with new messages, each one more terrifying than the last. The 12th, 13th, and 14th seals of the returnee Myung-il-sung have been broken. Il-sung was regaining his full strength, and the pace of it was overwhelming. Then, without warning, Il-sung triggered his power. Small black fire cannon. The name flashed in the air, and within seconds, a violet energy burst across the horizon. Dokja reacted fast. He grabbed Soo-young and dragged her behind a building for cover, but the impact was unbelievable. A deep purple beam shot forward, slicing through buildings like they were made of paper. Half a dozen high-rises crumbled in an instant. A major part of the street was erased, as if it had never existed. Those who had tried to confront Il-sung, people who just moments ago were charging at him, were disintegrated. Not even their bones remained. This wasn't just power, this was destruction incarnate. Beside Dokja, Soo-young collapsed. Her face was pale. Her voice trembled. She couldn't understand how anyone was supposed to defeat that. Dokja tried to fight that fear. He spoke firmly, declaring that they could still win, that if they struck now, they had a better chance than ever. Soo-young, however, couldn't accept that. She had just watched people vanish like ash in the wind. She wanted to escape, not fight. She had seen Dokja hesitate earlier, nearly give up, and now suddenly he was filled with confidence. It didn't make sense to her. Before Dokja could answer, a shadow loomed behind Soo-young. It was Il-sung. He had crept behind them like a predator. Il-sung recognized them as members of the former Hunters Association. His smile widened with cruel amusement. He reminded them of how they had ruined everything, how he had planned a glorious return to start over, to be welcomed as a hero, but they had destroyed that dream. Now there was nothing left to hold him back. Il-sung stood confidently, his eyes wild and voice twisted with bitterness. He spoke of his dreams, how he once wanted to teach arrogant S-grade incarnations a lesson, destroy overconfident coalitions, and spend time with beautiful women. He had imagined himself as a powerful figure, but now, standing in front of everyone as a labeled villain, he laughed bitterly. Everything had changed. He was no longer a hero in his own story, and he wanted the world to acknowledge that fall. The question lingered in the air. What would they do about him now? So-young was gripped with fear. She could see the difference. Il-sung was no longer the man they had once known. He had grown too strong, far beyond what they could handle. She cried out in despair, saying they could never defeat him now. But before she could finish, Il-sung appeared behind them again. His smile was dark, and before either Dokja or So-young could react, he struck them both with incredible force. Their bodies flew across the air like broken puppets and crashed against the torn asphalt, leaving deep cracks in the ground. Just then, a translucent system window opened in front of Dokja. The voice of Jung-hyuk came through. He warned Dokja there was no way to win in a direct fight. Il-sung was too powerful, but Dokja still wanted to try. He couldn't turn away now. Jung-hyuk, however, didn't hold back. He criticized Dokja sharply, questioning how things had fallen apart so badly. He reminded him of missed opportunities. If he had killed Solwa or taken down Antinous with Lycon, perhaps this disaster could have been avoided. Dokja responded honestly. He wasn't a regressor like Jung-hyuk. He didn't have multiple lives to take risks. One mistake would mean death. That's why he always had to think, to plan, to calculate again and again. But Jung-hyuk wasn't impressed. He told Dokja not to be arrogant. Just because he knew parts of the future didn't mean he could control it. That kind of thinking was dangerous. It was foolish to believe that knowledge alone could rewrite fate. Dokja felt the weight of those words. It hit him like a punch in the chest. Deep down, he realized that Jung-hyuk was right. He had grown arrogant because he had read the novel. He believed he could navigate any twist, outsmart any danger. But the world of the story was not a game. Real people suffered here. And now, the situation had spiraled too far beyond what he imagined. He wasn't omniscient, just a reader pretending to be in control. Still, Dokja pushed back. If Jung-hyuk saw this so clearly, then why wasn't he taking the lead? Why was someone like Dokja being expected to carry the burden? Jung-hyuk responded with something cryptic. He told Dokja that he might not even need the skill way of the wind to defeat Il-sung. That confused Dokja. That skill was critical, he was certain of it. But Jung-hyuk reminded him of something else. His own attribute was pro-gamer, and it had nothing to do with raw power. It was about knowledge, strategy, and skill. Then he turned the question to Dokja. What was his attribute? What was he really good at? Dokja, still running, was taken aback by the question. His mind searched for an answer. What was he good at? And in that moment, Dokja stopped running. He stood still, caught in thought. Il-sung stared at Dokja with disbelief. He couldn't understand why Dokja wasn't running. The man who had just been beaten and thrown aside now stood still, as if he planned to fight. Il-sung mocked him, reminding him of the humiliating defeat just moments ago. But Dokja didn't respond. Instead, he quietly closed his eyes. Inside his mind, Dokja searched for clarity. Something was missing, something important. He forced himself to calm down. He needed to remember what he was truly good at. It wasn't fighting, it wasn't strength, it was reading. That had always been his weapon. He activated Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. Suddenly, he could hear it. Movements, timing, direction. He felt a shift in the air toward his right shoulder. Il-sung lunged forward. Dokja moved swiftly, dodging the incoming blow with surprising precision. His hand grasped the handle of the sword. He invoked the stigma song of the sword, filling the weapon with the words left behind by the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare. The ancient lines resonated. Today I am prepared for death. I pray to God in heaven, may I destroy the enemy. With the blade of faith activated, a surge of energy burst from the sword. Dokja charged at Il-sung with purpose. Il-sung met his assault casually. His hand struck the glowing blade without effort. Then, in the next breath, Dokja sensed the movement toward his head. Il-sung jumped high into the air and dropped down with a brutal kick. The impact landed squarely on Dokja's skull. His body crashed across the ground violently. Pain filled every part of Dokja's mind. He cursed inwardly. The information he had from 3 ways to survive the apocalypse wasn't enough. Even with Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, he couldn't react to everything in time. He considered using Ganpyeonggi, the weapon that could call a constellation, but hesitated. He didn't want to take on another debt. He hated it. How powerless he felt. He wished for talent, even a borrowed talent, if only he could steal someone's power. Then, a thought stopped him. Steal? That single word jolted his mind. A sudden realization hit him like a shockwave. Information had always been his strongest asset, but he had gathered so much of it that he had forgotten some crucial parts. And now, finally, the the forgotten detail returned to him. He cursed himself for overlooking it. How could he have forgotten that? Just then, Soo-young cried out, unsure why Dokja was still fighting, but Dokja had already made up his mind. He activated his personal skill, Bookmark. Out of all the bookmarks, only one slot remained open. He didn't hesitate. He didn't need Jung-hyuk or Soo-young, not this time. He scrolled through the characters, searching for the right one. Then he found him. He smiled to himself. That person was a character too. He selected him immediately and slotted him into the fourth bookmark. He chose the skill without delay. Suddenly, silver wind whirled around Dokja's body. A new energy filled his limbs. It was like a wild storm had embraced him. The courage of a lone wolf surged inside him, swift, alert, unstoppable. Then, the notification appeared that the Way of the Wind level 8 has been activated. Soo-young stood frozen in disbelief. She couldn't understand how Dokja had managed to activate Way of the Wind. She had believed he wasn't capable of learning it, and yet now, the power surrounding him was undeniable. But Dokja's expression had changed. His voice was cold, distant. Without hesitation, he told Soo-young to step back. A storm now surrounded him, wind gathering at his feet, swirling in his hands. The cryptic description he once didn't understand had finally made sense. The Way of the Wind was now real. A gale in the right hand, a tempest in the left. The moment the curve and straight line intersected, the path opened. It wasn't just theory anymore. It was action. Il-sung noticed the change too. His eyes narrowed, alert. Bam! Dokja moved like a phantom, his fist crashing against Il-sung's face with devastating force. Time itself seemed to slow as the impact twisted Il-sung's features. His body shot backward violently, scraping across the ground and smashing through debris before finally sliding to a stop. But Il-sung only smiled. He rose with a smirk, brushing off the hit. He acknowledged Dokja's new speed and recognized the technique. He had seen the wolves use it before. This didn't intimidate him. In fact, it amused him. Meanwhile, deep within his thoughts, Dokja finally understood. He wasn't a regressor or someone born to fight. He wasn't someone who mastered skills through brute force or natural talent. He was a reader, and that was his greatest strength. He remembered the strange phrases that once confused him. Tempest in the left hand, storm in the right. The way of the wind opens where the straight and curved meet. Back then, it felt like nonsense, but now it was crystal clear. Il-sung's mocking tone suddenly changed. His smile widened as he revealed a cruel truth. He was the one who had killed the king of the wolves. Then, without warning, Il-sung vanished. He activated Blink, the teleportation skill. Dokja instantly recognized the move and realized Il-sung wasn't escaping. He was searching, looking for someone. Il-sung reappeared at another location, quickly spotting a small group of people. He walked toward them, casually picking one. Without giving much context, he asked for a name. The startled man barely had time to react, but before anything else could happen, Dokja raced through the city streets. His movement now rivaled the speed of Jung-hyuk's Red Phoenix Shunpo. He tracked Il-sung down and leapt forward with a powerful flying kick aimed at Il-sung's back. Yet the attack was blocked. With just a flick of his wrist, Il-sung parried the blow. A new wave of pressure spread from him. Another one of his inner seals had broken. This was the 24th, and it made him stronger than before. He looked back at Dokja and grinned. That strike hadn't hurt him. If anything, it had amused him. Dokja landed and stepped back. His heart pounded, and he cursed under his breath. He had arrived too late. Way of the Wind alone wasn't enough to finish the fight. It was too limited as just a support skill. He knew he had to go beyond it, but activating that skill would take time, and someone had to buy him that time. Something suddenly came crashing down from the sky, descending like a hawk with ruthless precision. The figure tore through the air and landed with a violent impact, creating a crater upon hitting the ground. Dust and debris exploded outward as the shock rippled across the street. At the center of the crater, Il-sung lay sprawled out, pinned down with a heavy boot pressing on his head. Standing over him was a familiar figure, Jung-hyuk. His presence was like a hammer of judgment, sharp and unwavering. Dokja stared in disbelief. Jung-hyuk wasn't supposed to be here. He had said it would take 2 days to recover, yet here he was, early and already fighting. Dokja instinctively stepped back as Jung-hyuk began to approach with his usual expressionless resolve. Jung-hyuk wasted no time. He declared his intention to hold Il-sung back and ordered Dokja to begin whatever he was preparing. Soo-young stood to the side, half amused, half impressed. There was no mistaking it. Jung-hyuk was built like the protagonist of a story, taking center stage the moment things escalated. Il-sung, however, was no longer smiling. His amusement had faded. With a cold stare and swift motion, he threw Jung-hyuk off him. The force of it was tremendous. He charged forward with his claws gleaming, moving at frightening speed. Jung-hyuk shifted to a defensive stance, his sword meeting Il-sung's claws in mid-air. The clash of the two powers sent shockwaves through space itself. Jung-hyuk didn't fall, but the weight of the blows told him everything he needed to know. He hadn't fully recovered. His body could still move, but not at full strength. Despite this, he stood his ground and bellowed at Dokja to hurry. Dokja answered the call. He activated Way of the Wind, and immediately the currents began to shift. The 4 winds came together, wrapping around him in a protective formation. Then, they formed the shape of a trigram, aimed ancient, balanced, powerful. Junghyuk launched another attack, slashing his blade toward Ilsang, but Ilsang dodged with precision, grabbed Junghyuk's sword-wielding arm, and drove a brutal punch into his chest. The blow echoed like thunder. Junghyuk was sent flying, but managed to land on his feet, sliding across the ground while stabilizing himself. Ilsang's face changed. The arrogance faded. He now understood that the battle wasn't just sport, it was survival. He looked up, sensing something strange. Above him, the air itself had begun to vanish. The dome was silent, unnaturally calm. Then, everything shifted. The wind, once wild and untamed, was suddenly everywhere and nowhere at the same time. A terrifying stillness engulfed the battlefield. It was not silence, but the absence of any medium for sound to travel. It was a vacuum. Dokja had created it. This was the true power of Way of the Wind, not just speed or movement, but control over the environment. The air was stripped from the space around Ilsang, trapping him in a vacuum prison. This was Dokja's answer. Against the catastrophe of questions, brute strength wouldn't work. What he needed was absolute control, and this was it. Ilsang tried to speak. His lips moved frantically, his expression confused and angry, but nothing came out. No sound, no power in his voice. Without air, even questions couldn't be asked, and for the first time, Ilsang was completely silent. Dokja activated his exclusive skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. At once, he could hear the confused thoughts of Ilsang, who was trapped inside the vacuum prison. Ilsang was panicking. He didn't understand why he couldn't speak. He couldn't grasp what had just happened to him. The silence was unnatural and terrifying. Suddenly, system messages appeared. The penalty of the disaster of questions had been activated, and the power of the returnee Ilsang was weakened. The vacuum wasn't just suffocating him physically, it was also cutting off the very foundation of his strength. Dokja now understood the true nature of Ilsang's power. As the catastrophe of questions, Ilsang needed to speak, to ask, in order to function. The more he questioned, the more his powers returned. But if he stayed silent, even for a while, those powers would begin to fade. The vacuum prison had become the perfect counter to his ability. Inside the airless dome, Ilsang's face turned red from oxygen deprivation. His body twisted as he silently screamed, his eyes wide with desperation. One by one, the seals on his body, those he had broken earlier, began to relock. Each sealed layer was a sign that his strength was being stripped away again. Dokja watched closely. Although disasters could grow powerful quickly, they could also be weakened just as easily if the correct method was used. This was the balance set by the dokkaebi. They ensured fairness in the scenarios, creating rules that even catastrophes had to follow. It was a cruel form of sport, but one with its own twisted logic. Ilsang slammed his fists against the swirling wind wall again and again, but his strength meant nothing against a prison that had no surface to break. The more he fought, the more futile it became. Dokja was under strain. He knew he couldn't maintain the vacuum forever, not at its current size. The mana consumption was too high. He began to focus on reducing its scale, shrinking the field until it covered only Ilsang's body. This would conserve energy while keeping the effect intact. Junghyuk, though injured and unsteady, guided Dokja with his calm voice. He reminded him not to control the wind by force. Wind wasn't something to dominate, it was something to guide. Blood trickled from Dokja's nose. The pressure on his body and mind was enormous. Still, he endured it. The wind around Ilsang began to change. No longer a large dome, but a tight layer wrapped directly around his form. Ilsang, now furious, gathered his remaining power and threw a punch with all his strength. The wind cracked for a second. He managed to pierce the outer shell of the vacuum. He was shocked, thinking for a moment that he had broken free, but the illusion faded just as fast. The wind, like a living thing, curled inward. It wrapped around his arms, his legs, his chest, and then his face. His mouth was sealed by invisible force. His movement slowed as the air tightened. His entire body was now under the grip of the wind. Junghyuk, despite being injured and weary, glanced at Dokja with a faint expression of acknowledgement. Junghyuk had seen enough to admit it. Dokja was finally showing true talent. But the battle wasn't over. Ilsang, still trapped within the tightening vacuum, raised his right arm. It was now covered in ominous dark red flames. Without warning, he unleashed a massive fire cannon. The black flames tore through the air like a tidal wave, crashing straight toward the dome of wind. Yet even this powerful attack didn't shatter the structure. The prison held. The real danger, however, lay beyond the barrier. Those black flames didn't stop at the dome's edge. They spilled outward, spreading destruction across the battlefield. People were dying, burned alive by the corrupted fire. It was chaos outside the vacuum. Junghyuk noticed the distress on Dokja's face. He told him not to hesitate, not to care about the others. According to Junghyuk, they wouldn't have cared if Dokja had died in their place. But Dokja couldn't think that way. Not all people were like that. Not everyone was cruel. Some were worth saving. And so, without wasting another second, he ran into the flames. He knew Ilsang was weaker now. That massive attack had drained him. Dokja could feel it. The energy of the wind flowed through his body more smoothly than before. The wind wasn't resisting him anymore. It was as if he and the wind had become one. A system notification rang out. Dokja's hidden potential had bloomed. His spirit had awakened something deeper. He remembered remembered scenes from the novel, how Lycon and Junghyuk once used the way of the wind in perfect harmony. The tempest in the left hand, the storm in the right. Now Dokja understood, truly understood. Before he had read about these characters from behind the glass of a story. No matter how deep he studied, he couldn't feel what they felt. But now, the story was part of him. He wasn't just reading about it, he was living it. The black flames collided with the rotating dome, but the wind responded violently. The vacuum prison held steady in Dokja's left hand, while his right hand moved the currents of the wind to counter the flames. His body was in agony, skin scorched, nerves numb, pain crawling up his bones. But he remained in a state of focused trance. The spinning wind and the dark fire clashed in a sonic boom. The battlefield shook from the impact. Slowly, the black flames lost their force. They were scattered, twisted, and pulled apart by the sheer force of the wind. Onlookers who had survived could only stare in disbelief. None of them could understand what they were witnessing. Dokja stood at the center of the storm. Blood poured from his face as he coughed violently, but he didn't fall. His body was battered, but his mana still hadn't run dry. He felt it. His energy was still full. That puzzled him. From behind, Junghyuk's voice cut through the dying winds. His meaning was clear. If Dokja were to fall, it would be by his hand alone. Dokja, catching his breath, pieced it together, so that's why his mana hadn't run out. Junghyuk had transferred his own energy to him during the fight, quietly, without a word. No glory, no recognition, just enough to keep him going. Dokja hadn't even noticed until now, and in that moment, all the seals on Ilsung's body were now completely locked. His powers had been sealed away again. At that very moment, Dokja's personal skill, the Way of the Wind, deactivated. Ilsung dropped to the ground, his body trembling and coughing violently from the shock. His limbs barely held him up as he gasped for air. Dokja stood in front of him, eyes cold and filled with warning. If Ilsung made a mistake, it would be his end. Ilsung, still on all fours, looked broken. He could barely speak as he muttered in disbelief. The pain in his voice wasn't just physical, it came from something deeper, a shattered identity. Inside Dokja's mind, a quiet realization formed. Ilsung was just a 17-year-old high school student, once an innocent boy, chosen by fate to be the hero of Chronos. He probably never imagined his journey would end like this. He didn't want to become a villain, but fate hadn't been kind. Now, with a terrified gaze, Ilsung muttered the one truth he clung to. He believed he was meant to be the main character, but those words were only whispers of a story that had already left him behind. He was a man who dreamed of being the protagonist, but had failed in the end. Then, without hesitation, Junghyuk stepped forward. The true protagonist drove his blade into Ilsung's back, ending the story of the returnee who lost his way. At that moment, system messages filled the air. A major announcement echoed through Dokja's vision. This was the first victory against a returnee in the scenario. The contributors were named Dokja and Junghyuk. They had earned 40,000 coins as a reward for the achievement. But that wasn't all. A new fable was born. The one who fought against a miracle. Along with it came the potential to gain a new stigma. Dokja had just carved his name into the narrative of this world once more. He rose slowly and looked around. His hands still tingled with the feeling of the wind. He could sense it moving naturally, as if it had become a part of him. But the city of Gangdong-gu lay in ruin. Even though the disaster had passed, the damage was everywhere. The ground had been torn apart. Tall buildings had collapsed into rubble. Survivors clutched their wounds. Some wept quietly. Others stared blankly at what remained. A few people bowed their heads to Dokja, grateful, but most of the people lay still, lifeless. The silence of death settled across the scene like a heavy fog. Dokja looked at it all and reflected. These moments were never described in the novel, yet Junghyuk must have seen sights like this countless times. Dokja always believed he had read the story to its end, but now he saw how little he truly understood. This world wasn't just words and scenes. It was alive in ways he could never have imagined. Then, a translucent message appeared in front of him, an unexpected notification. A dokkaebi had invited him to a channel. He looked up. Floating in the air was a single-legged dokkaebi, watching him with a sly and eerie smile. Behind him stood Baehyung, looking tense and uncomfortable as he glanced between the two. It was Dogak, a storyteller who controlled many major channels, including the massive Tokyo Dome broadcast. Unlike Baehyung and the other mid-tier dokkaebi who only bluffed and boasted, Dogak was different. He was dangerous. He was not someone to be taken lightly. Dokja quickly pieced the situation together. He understood what was happening. Something was off. He had just survived a brutal scenario, but his reward hadn't arrived. He turned his attention toward the dokkaebi responsible. Dogak, the powerful high-level dokkaebi, stood above with a sly and arrogant presence. When questioned, he offered a forced apology. The system messages finally appeared in Dokja's vision, confirming the coins he had earned. As he read through the numbers, a thought formed in his mind. It was Dogak who had initiated this sub-scenario, so most of the reward likely came directly from him. Dokja could almost feel Dogak's irritation through the screen. He must have hated having to give it away, but Dokja didn't stop there. He remembered there had been a mention of an additional reward, something more for making the scenario especially entertaining. He brought it up. Dogak, still still trying to maintain his smug tone, acknowledged it. He admitted that Dokja was the one who truly made the event worthwhile. He then turned toward Baehyung and ordered him to prepare the reward. Baehyung, caught completely off guard, responded with confusion and fear. He didn't understand why he was suddenly being dragged into this. His voice shook as he tried to reason that this wasn't his responsibility. Dokja, however, was in no mood to entertain disobedience. He raised his voice and commanded Baehyung again, this time with clear authority. Baehyung tried to defend himself. He reminded Dokja that the current sub-scenario wasn't under his control, but Dokja wasn't listening to excuses. Instead, he made his power clear. He pointed out that Baehyung's channel had grown significantly recently. He knew the numbers, the influence, the expanding viewership. Terrified, Baehyung denied it, but the pressure didn't stop. Dokja reminded him that the sixth scenario would soon involve both Japan and Korea, bringing fierce competition between the two. His words were heavy with warning. Realizing resistance was pointless, Baehyung gave in. He promised to prepare the reward immediately, his voice filled with panic. Dokja watched the entire exchange quietly. The interaction revealed something he hadn't fully considered before. There were power dynamics even among the dokkaebi. He had seen Baehyung act smug, sarcastic, and even cruel. But now, seeing him treated so harshly by Dokja felt a strange mixture of emotion. They had gone through their own ups and downs, but this moment exposed how little control Baehyung truly had in front of higher beings. Then the system message appeared once again, announcing the actual reward. Dokja had received the protection symbol of the parasite. This was no ordinary reward. Along with it came the first chance to choose from among 3 SSS-grade items. Dokja's eyes sharpened. These were not random gifts. The system was offering something powerful, something specifically suited for someone who had just defeated a catastrophe. Baehyung, now visibly shaken after being scolded by Dokja, stepped forward with a lowered gaze. He quietly told Dokja to choose his reward. The energy around him had completely changed. His usual smug confidence was gone. He looked like someone who had just been publicly humiliated. Still, Baehyung offered his personal advice. He recommended the infinite dimension space coat, hinting that it had a hidden feature. He explained that it would make transcending in the future much easier. It was rare for Baehyung to be this honest or helpful, but before he could say more, Dokja's voice cut through the moment. His tone was sharp and authoritative. He reminded Baehyung that he had a duty, not just to Dokja, but to the entire audience of constellations watching. Each item needed to be explained properly. Startled, Baehyung snapped back into form, apologizing immediately and preparing to describe the rewards again. Meanwhile, Dokja glanced at his screen, curious about what Junghyuk would choose. But when he looked over at him, he was taken aback. Junghyuk wasn't doing anything. He wasn't moving, speaking, or reacting. He was simply staring at Dokja. A closer look confirmed it. Junghyuk had likely passed out while still standing. His body had been pushed beyond its limits during the scenario. Even someone as tough as him had a breaking point. He needed time to recover. Then, from the side, Soo-young stepped up energetically. She asked if she could make the choice in Junghyuk's place. Her tone was light, but Dokja didn't miss the danger in her question. Without missing a beat, he reminded her that doing so would likely lead to trouble. Getting involved in Junghyuk's decisions usually had consequences. The warning worked. Soo-young quickly went quiet. Dokja then made his own decision. He chose the infinite dimension space coat, trusting Baehyung's recommendation and his own instincts. It was a strategic pick, an item that wasn't just powerful now but had long-term value. Dokja responded immediately. He praised the decision and informed Dokja that the next part of the reward process couldn't happen here. The additional rewards needed to be given elsewhere. Dokja was skeptical. He didn't know what this meant or where they were going, but Dokja had already made preparations. Dokja told him he would personally escort him to his dokkaebi gamtu. In traditional Korean fairy tales, a gamtu is a formal hat worn by government officials. But in this world, the ways of survival, the term had a different meaning. A dokkaebi gamtu wasn't clothing. It was a special room, a hidden space where dokkaebi kept their true forms concealed from the world. Dokja stood firm, refusing Dokja's suggestion to go to the dokkaebi gamtu. He didn't want to step into the private domain of a dokkaebi. It was dangerous. There were no scenario rules that required him to be in a gamtu to receive his reward, and he had read the ways of survival long enough to know how these beings operated. Entering Dokja's personal space could expose him to risks he couldn't afford right now. Dokja insisted on receiving the reward right where he was, but Dokja only laughed. His laugh was calm but carried a threat. He hinted that if Dokja continued to cause trouble, he could cancel the reward altogether. Dokja gave in with a sharp breath. He pretended to agree, not because he believed Dokja could really cancel it, but because pushing things further would serve no benefit. The star stream was strict about rewards. Once a scenario ended, the rewards had to be delivered. Not even a dokkaebi had the power to cancel what was already promised. Not even if it was a sub-scenario. Dokja knew that much. But then something unexpected happened. Dokja spoke to him again, this time using dokkaebi communication, the mental channel that allowed them to speak in secret. His tone had shifted. It was no longer playful or threatening. It was direct. Dokja warned him. The sudden change made Dokja pause. He didn't expect this turn. Dokja revealed something more. He said said he had heard stories about dokja, that his reputation had spread beyond Korea. Even the constellations from abroad knew who he was now. Dokja's name, once unknown, was now echoing through the narrative systems of multiple worlds. Then came the real reason for the private message. Dokja made an offer. He wanted dokja to join his channel. He was planning to expand in Korea and was looking for a strong face to lead his content. He said he would meet any terms. No conditions were off limits. It was a direct recruitment, an offer rarely made by dokkaebi, especially high-ranking ones. Dokja processed this in silence. It was surprising, unexpected. He hadn't thought of himself that way, but the comparison in his mind was clear. It felt like a player from the lesser-known Asian league suddenly being scouted by a top European football club like La Liga. The gap in power and prestige was real, and now he was being invited to cross that gap, but dokja wasn't moved. He rejected the offer coldly. He didn't care about expanding a dokkaebi's viewership. He only wanted what was rightfully his, the reward, and he wanted dokja to stop wasting his time. Dokja, hearing that response, gave a strange smile. He commented on dokja's boldness. The rumors must be true. Dokja really wasn't afraid of dokkaebi. He stood his ground like no other incarnation did, but Dokja didn't seem angry. Instead, his eyes sharpened. He admitted that he had been planning to reveal something after the rewards were given, but now with dokja's defiance, he decided to bring it forward. His tone grew colder. Dokja was arrogant, that was clear, but Dokja promised he would be humbled soon. A sharp laugh echoed from Dokja. He turned to the constellations watching the scenario, and then made a dramatic announcement. He said he had some unfortunate news. According to him, one of the channels operating within the Seoul Dome had been caught manipulating scenarios illegally. The name he revealed next stunned everyone. Behyung. Dokja claimed that a recent survey had been conducted. According to this, the low-grade dokkaebis working in Seoul Dome had decided that the channel BI7623, managed by Behyung, had violated the core law of plausibility. He explained that there had been excessive manipulation of scenarios, and this had led to a breach in probability. His tone was cold, yet satisfied. He was accusing Behyung formally and requested that the Bureau investigate the matter. This sudden shift caught everyone by surprise. So-young was confused and alarmed. She couldn't understand what Dokja meant or why the term plausibility was being used all of a sudden. Dokja, however, understood it right away. In his mind, it became clear. Dokja was doing this out of spite. He had offered Dokja a place in his channel, and after being rejected, he was now using this situation to strike back. Behyung, on the other hand, was already panicking. He stuttered in shock, unable to think clearly, as his position was suddenly under public attack. Dokja, trying to stay calm, began analyzing the situation with precision. He asked Behyung if the officials had found out about the secret contract between them, but Behyung nervously denied it. Dokja pressed further. Could it be that the Bureau discovered Behyung had opened the dokkaebi shop earlier than allowed, just for him? Behyung again hesitated but denied it, though his nervous tone showed uncertainty. Despite Behyung's panic, Dokja remained steady. He reminded Behyung that even if those actions had been noticed, none of them actually broke the rules. Everything they did was unconventional, yes, but not illegal. There were no clear violations of the system's laws. No lines had been crossed. Inside his thoughts, Dokja was still cautious. He knew this wasn't about clear rule breaking. It was about perception. What they had done was rare, almost unheard of, but it wasn't wrong. Unless Dokja presented solid proof of a direct rule violation, the request for a plausibility review would likely be rejected. Dokja, standing amidst the fading light of the scenario, spoke with clear irritation. He was done waiting. He asked Dokja to stop wasting time and just hand over the scenario reward. The constellations too were clearly getting bored with the delay, but Dokja didn't seem concerned. Instead, he calmly stated that this was more important than rewards, because it directly involved Dokja. Then, Dokja snapped his fingers. In the sky above them, a massive screen appeared. It was vivid and high definition, visible to all the watching constellations. The first footage began to play. It showed Dokja's recent battle with the poisoner, Solwa. The video clearly revealed that he had chosen not to kill her. The scene quickly shifted to another battle, this one showing Dokja merely observing the intense fight between Lycan and Antinous from a distance. Finally, the third screen displayed the chaotic battle between Dokja and Ilsang, the disaster of questions, who was seen releasing his seals repeatedly as Dokja fought him. Dokja then asked a question to the crowd of constellations watching. He wanted them to notice the pattern between all three clips. Dokja, sensing something was wrong, tried to piece the connection together. As the scenes replayed in his mind, the realization struck him. These weren't just random battles, they were situations where he could have killed the enemy, but deliberately didn't. He began to understand that Dokja wasn't just talking to him now, he was talking to the entire constellation audience. Dokja continued, now speaking with strength and confidence to the crowd. He pointed out how Dokja had spared the poison beauty, Solwa, even though killing her could have prevented the catastrophe. He said Dokja could have stopped Antinous too, which would have prevented another disaster. And when it came to Ilsang, Dokja allowed the seals to break instead of stopping him early. The conclusion was brutal and clear. Dokja announced that Dokja had deliberately made the scenario harder. Not just that, he accused Dokja of secretly working with Baehyung, the storyteller of his channel. According to Dogak, they had manipulated the story from behind the scenes. They had exaggerated the scenario, hid Dokja's true power, and deceived the constellations. It was all done to produce a more dramatic and emotional story, one that would make the constellations spend more coins for a satisfying ending. Dokja's heart sank. He now understood Dogak's real goal. Dogak wasn't trying to punish him through the rules of plausibility. That was just a smokescreen. His actual aim was to destroy Baehyung's channel, completely and publicly. As the crowd watched in silence, the damage began. One by one, the constellations started to leave Baehyung's channel. System messages popped up in quick succession. With each exit, the channel shrank. Baehyung's dokkaebi form began to collapse. His horns became smaller, his glowing body dimmed, and his presence started fading. His eyes filled with tears, not just from sadness, but from humiliation. The other dokkaebis around him laughed, ridiculing him as he crumbled under the weight of the betrayal and the abandonment. Dokja let out a heavy sigh. The channel was as good as dead. There was nothing more to save. He turned to Dogak and told him to stop dragging it out. He was ready. He agreed to accept Dogak's offer. In exchange, he asked for his reward. The battle was over, and Dokja knew when to retreat. Dogak smiled, clearly pleased. He commented that at least Dokja still had some sense left in him. Baehyung looked up at Dokja with wide, betrayed eyes. His voice trembled, but no words came out. To him, it felt like the final blow. Being abandoned by the incarnation he had risked everything on. But Dokja's face remained hard. He didn't look back. He simply told him there was nothing he could do now. It was already too late. He had to move forward. Then, Dogak nodded and finally announced the moment everyone had been waiting for. Dogak casually flicked his fingers, and in an instant, the entire landscape around Dokja disappeared. When Dokja opened his eyes again, he found himself standing in what looked like a luxurious hotel suite. The air was calm and refined, unlike anything he had just been through. The floor was covered with elegant rugs, and low tables and chairs were arranged neatly. For a moment, Dokja looked around, unsure. Was this really Dogak's official post? It felt strange to be standing in such comfort after the chaos just moments ago. The room was too quiet, too polished. Eventually, Dokja walked to the wide window, curious about what lay beyond, and then he froze. What he saw outside wasn't any ordinary scenery. Stretching endlessly into the distance was the deep, eternal darkness of the grand universe. Within that black void floated stars, thousands of them, sparkling like scattered jewels. The beauty of it was breathtaking. It felt like staring into infinity itself. Dogak's voice broke the silence, but it sounded different this time. It wasn't the broadcasted tone Dokja had grown used to. It was deeper, more personal, his real voice. This was the true Dogak standing here now, not just a projection. Dokja's eyes widened. He realized the significance of what he was hearing. He had only ever heard this voice through broadcasts before, but now, standing face to face with Dogak, he was meeting the real being behind the curtain. Dogak spoke again, with a sharp awareness in his tone. He asked Dokja if he had any foolish ideas, his words holding an unspoken warning, but Dokja responded calmly in his mind. He had no intention of attacking a dokkaebi. He wasn't stupid. He knew the rules of this world too well. Dogak seemed satisfied with that answer. He liked that Dokja understood his limits. He then suggested they move forward with the contract. Another flick of Dogak's fingers, and Baehyung appeared out of nowhere. But Baehyung wasn't free. He was bound by the system, tied up tightly, and forced into a submissive position. His eyes were filled with silent frustration as he stared at Dokja. Dogak explained that Baehyung was there to serve as the notary for the new contract. Since Dokja still had an active contract with Baehyung, it had to be cancelled first before a new one could begin. According to the system, Baehyung was required to pay compensation for breaching their agreement. At that moment, Dokja realized something that made his chest tighten. Dogak had known all along about the secret deal between him and Baehyung. This entire setup had been planned from the start. Dogak had dragged everything into the open with full intention. Dokja gave a cold, distant response. He didn't care anymore. He told Dogak to do whatever he wanted. Dogak, amused by the quick agreement, moved ahead. He then asked if Dokja would like to review the contract terms. After all, even Dogak had never signed one like this before. It was his first time. A system message appeared before Dokja. The contract details were laid out clearly in text. As Dokja read through it, his expression slowly darkened. The terms were far worse than he expected. Dogak would receive half of all donations from the constellations. There were strict conditions limiting Dokja's freedom. Worst of all, the contract treated him as an employee under Dogak, not an equal partner, not even an independent contractor. Dogak stood with a smug expression, clearly pleased with the contract he had offered. He asked Dokja what he thought about it, explaining that such terms were normal in his profession. However, he added that if needed, some changes could be made to the terms. But Dokja wasn't fooled. Inwardly, Dokja saw through the act. Dokja was lying. Even Baehyung, who wasn't exactly the most trustworthy dokkaebi, hadn't offered a contract this unfair. Dokja knew this was a trap dressed as an opportunity. Still, he stayed calm and pretended to accept the offer. He said the terms weren't bad, but added that he had a request to make before signing anything. Dokja, curious now, asked him what kind of request. Dokja replied that he didn't want to move to another channel alone. Baehyung's channel had some powerful constellations following it. Leaving them behind would be a waste. When Dokja asked which constellations he meant, Dokja confidently named them: the Prisoner of the Golden Headband, the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, the Demonic Judge of Fire, and more. As soon as Dokja heard those names, especially the Prisoner of the Golden Headband, his eyes lit up. He was clearly impressed and surprised that such well-known constellations had been following Baehyung all along. Baehyung, still gagged and bound, gave a furious reaction. His eyes widened and he let out muffled sounds of protest. But then he shifted to dokkaebi communication to reach Dokja mentally. He asked how Dokja could do this to him, the betrayal cutting deep. Baehyung had trusted him, but Dokja sent back a quiet message through the same channel. He asked Baehyung if he still trusted him. Confused and hurt, Baehyung asked what he meant. Dokja only said to trust him just this once. Things couldn't possibly get worse than they already were. That was the only assurance he gave. Then Dokja turned back to Dokja and calmly made his suggestion. He wanted those constellations to be able to move with him, not separately, but through him. He asked Dokja to link him directly to the new channel. Dokja was slightly taken aback. He pointed out that this meant Dokja would be connected to two channels at once, but Dokja didn't mind. That was exactly the point. If he was connected to both, then the constellations could naturally shift from one to the other, following him, not the platform. Dokja thought about it for a moment. He realized that Dokja had a point. Dokja stood calmly, his voice steady as he spoke to Dokja. He said he had one more request. He was curious. After spending all this time in a small, isolated channel, he wanted to see what it felt like to be in a bigger one. He wanted a glimpse into what kind of constellations were waiting for him in the vast higher level channels of the star stream. Dokja seemed amused. He let out a short laugh, almost mocking, and praised Baehyung for having discovered such a sharp and ambitious incarnation. But his expression soon turned smug as he declared that this promising incarnation would now belong to him instead. At that moment, Baehyung's face shifted visibly. His expression turned sorrowful, clearly pained to see Dokja being taken away so easily. Still grinning, Dokja agreed to the request. He said he would show Dokja what the big leagues really looked like. With graceful movements of his fingers, Dokja manipulated the system around them. It felt like something invisible, like a thread or a cord, suddenly pierced into Dokja's body. There was a new connection formed, one that stretched out far and wide into the unknown. Dokja blinked slowly. In that moment, he felt them. Gazes, dozens, hundreds, thousands. The weight of their attention pressed against him from every direction. A shiver ran down his spine. His skin tingled, every hair on his body standing up. These were not like the viewers from Baehyung's small channel. These were powerful constellations, ancient, noble, terrifying. He didn't need to see them to know. He could feel them watching. The presence of each one was heavy, almost overwhelming, and they weren't just from Korea. Dokja realized in awe that many of these constellations were from other continents, and even entirely different worlds. This was the scale of the wider star stream. The possibilities here were endless. If he could perform well under such powerful eyes, the number of coins he could earn would be unimaginable. Dokja then asked what Dokja thought of this new place. Dokja gave a simple answer, acknowledging its vastness and strength, but he didn't stop there. He calmly added that before signing anything, he wanted to greet the beings who were watching him. Since they were already looking at him, he wanted to formally introduce himself. Dokja gave him permission. Dokja slowly closed his eyes. With his mind clear and heart focused, he reached out through the system and spoke. He sent a silent but powerful message to the audience above him. To the constellations gathered at Tokyo Dome, he asked if they could hear him, and in response, the system sent back a message, confirmation that several of those constellations had turned their eyes fully toward Dokja. Dokja stood firmly within the connection to the grand channel, his voice confident and composed. He began to speak directly to the powerful constellations who were watching from the vast reaches of the Tokyo Dome channel. He introduced himself once more, his name, his feats, and the strength he had earned. He spoke of the ruler's throne, which he had destroyed. He reminded them that he had become the king of a world that had no king. Unlike most incarnations, he didn't have a supporting constellation behind him. That alone made him stand out among countless others. Then, with a spark of confidence, Dokja proposed an event to mark this moment, a collaboration, he called it, between Korea and Japan. It would be a special occasion, and he invited all interested constellations to join him on Baehyung's channel. As an extra incentive, he even mentioned a coin draw for those who arrived early. Just as he was about to continue, the system cut the channel connection. Dokja opened his eyes and found Dokja staring at him, clearly shocked. The senior dokkaebi's expression had shifted from amused to furious. He couldn't believe what Dokja had just done. To him, this was reckless, a stunt that could easily provoke the high-tier constellations. But Dokja remained calm. He simply quickly explained that he was only hosting an event. It was nothing more than a welcome gesture to those who might be interested. Dokjak's anger only deepened. He yelled in frustration, claiming that the constellations in his channel would never fall for such a trick. But even as he spoke, the atmosphere around them began to shift. A sudden surge of notifications filled the air. One after another, constellations started entering Bahyang's channel. The once quiet BY7623 began to glow. Its channel level started rising rapidly as powerful eyes poured in from across the star stream. The event had caught their attention. What had seemed like a playful speech was turning into something far greater. Dokja was stunned. He called out to the constellations, asking why they were leaving his channel, but it was too late. The viewers had already made their choice. Dokja smiled as he looked at the system messages confirming the arrival of many constellations. His words had reached them. They had come not out of obligation, but out of curiosity, drawn by his confidence and mystery. But not everyone was pleased. The system displayed new messages. The prisoner of the golden headband seemed irritated by the sudden arrival of so many outsiders. Another, the maritime war god, expressed resentment toward the presence of potentially hostile constellations. Still, Dokja kept up his act, remaining composed. He asked them all to stay calm and promised that the event would begin soon. Then, shifting the tone slightly, he spoke again to the full audience. He questioned the true value of coins. What use were they if the constellations didn't have worthy incarnations to spend them on? To those who had missed his earlier message, he repeated it again with more force. He was Dokja, an incarnation who still didn't have a sponsor. He had already won the War of Kings and stopped 2 disasters even before the official scenarios had begun. There were likely no other incarnations in the world who could say the same, especially not without the support of a constellation. But then his tone shifted. He admitted things were becoming more difficult. As Dokja spoke with unwavering confidence, Dokjak's face began to lose color. He was starting to understand what Dokja was truly aiming for, but by then, it was already too late. Dokja turned his attention back to the Grand Channel and spoke clearly to the constellations watching. He reminded them that the 5th scenario for Seoul Dome was about to begin. That meant only one thing. The second supporting constellation selection event was near. He knew that the constellations, ever hungry for a powerful incarnation, were already waiting for this moment. And so, Dokja made an announcement that shook the channel. To celebrate the occasion, he declared that he would be hosting a special event of his own. If Bahyang's channel could reach over 10,000 subscribers before the support selection day, then he would choose one constellation from this channel as his partner. It wouldn't matter who. Anyone in the channel could be selected. He left them with a final reminder. It had to be 10,000 subscribers. That was the goal. Dokja, realizing the consequences, tried to stop him. He shouted in panic, demanding that Dokja wait, but the tide had already turned. A sudden surge of energy followed Dokja's words. System messages erupted, and channel notifications lit up like fireworks. The voice of the star stream echoed with movement and excitement. Dokja roared in fury, unable to stop what had begun. Sparks burst from around him, his anger now visible in pure power. He shouted that Dokja had crossed the line and that the price for this would be death. But Dokja remained unfazed. He reminded Dokja that countless constellations were now watching them. Any misstep here could lead to disastrous consequences. Still, Dokja refused to back down. He declared himself the master of the Tokyo Dome and claimed that he didn't fear breaking the laws of plausibility just to crush someone like Dokja. With that, Dokja moved. His fingers snapped through the air, aiming to erase Dokja like flicking away a mere insect. Sparks of destructive power surged toward Dokja once, twice, and again, but nothing happened. The sparks blinked out as quickly as they had come. The air grew cold. Dokja stared at his fingers in disbelief. The problem wasn't in his actions, it was something else entirely. Then came a presence that swallowed the space behind Dokja. A towering shadow appeared behind him. The weight of it was overwhelming, and a voice echoed from within that shadow. It was Bahyang, but this time, it wasn't the playful tone he usually used. This was his real voice, low, powerful, and cold. He addressed Dokja directly, asking if he found it amusing to show off his strength. Dokja flinched and turned around in shock. He demanded to know how Bahyang had broken free from the letters of imprisonment. That seal wasn't something easily undone, but Bahyang replied with ease. He had broken it simply by wriggling around. Dokja's face twisted in disbelief. His anger finally erupted as he called Bahyang a low-grade dokkaebi. He accused him of being disrespectful and reminded him that he, Dokja, was the master of a major dome. But Bahyang didn't step back. He snapped back without hesitation, calling Dokja low-level as well. Just because he had many subscribers didn't mean he was powerful. Dokja tried to defend himself, saying he had chosen not to climb ranks, but Bahyang didn't care. He reminded Dokja that all those great constellations he boasted about earlier, they were now in his own channel. He threw Dokja's earlier insults back at him, mocking how he had accused Bahyang of manipulating scenarios. Now Bahyang stood taller, his shadow growing even larger. With the dramatic rise in subscribers, Bahyang's presence was transforming. The once dismissed dokkaebi was no longer someone to ignore. Dokja, struggling to maintain control, lashed out with words, accusing Dokja of being an incarnation thief. But Bahyang Byung was far from intimidated. There was no trace of his usual playful tone. His real voice echoed with power and fury. Without hesitation, he rebuked Dogak as if scolding a misbehaving child who had never learned basic manners. Fear quickly crept into Dogak's expression. For the first time, his arrogance began to crack. He stuttered, warning Byung that attacking him would come with consequences. But those words came too late. Byung's right arm began to grow unnaturally large, its size stretching to monstrous proportions. Then, in a booming voice filled with contempt, he told Dogak to find his lost concept somewhere far away, maybe in the Andromeda scenario. In a flash, Byung's colossal fist erupted upward, smashing through the dome's ceiling with ease. Dogak, caught in the explosion of force, was hurled through the void, vanishing into the distance like a tiny speck lost in the stars. He was punched so hard it was as if he had truly been launched to the edge of the universe. Byung looked at his own hand and let out a sigh. Even he was surprised by how worked up he had gotten. He casually commented that his punch had probably sent Dogak all the way to the Andromeda scenario. Dokja quietly observed the scene. He now stood within the true realm of the dokkaebis, Gamtu. And unlike the shallow appearance Dogak often projected, this was Byung's real self, his true form as a dokkaebi, a being of terrifying power. Dokja, trying to remain calm, asked aloud whether something like an Andromeda scenario even existed, but his real thoughts were buried deep inside. He had clearly seen how much stronger Byung had become. As his channel had grown with thousands of subscribers, so had his power. This made Dokja uneasy. What he had just done earlier, manipulating the situation, pushing events forward, he had done all of it without Byung's permission. What if Byung held a grudge? What if this terrifying being standing before him turned his wrath next? But Byung didn't seem angry. He confirmed that the Andromeda scenario was indeed real. It was a scenario designed to bring clarity, to make someone see reason again. Yet he quickly shifted the conversation. Something else was on his mind, something more important. He asked Dokja if he knew what he was seeing now. Dokja didn't answer, but he had a feeling. It wasn't much different from what he himself was witnessing. Messages, countless, endless messages poured into the air, filling the atmosphere like a storm. The voices of constellations, the reactions of spectators across the starstream, the impact of Dokja's actions, the shock of Byung's emergence, the fall of Dogak. It was all being watched by the entire system. And now, the scenario would no longer be limited to just one dome or one city. It was expanding, stretching far beyond Seoul, far beyond the Tokyo Dome. The world was becoming the stage. It was Dokja's first time inside the official post of a dokkaebi, and the unfamiliar setting stirred his curiosity. While Byung was busy managing the restless constellations, Dokja's eyes wandered to the papers stacked neatly on a table nearby. One document stood out. It was labeled Singularity Trend Report. The word Singularity caught his attention. Driven by curiosity, he turned a few pages, but before he could understand anything, the entire report crumbled into dust right in his hands, as if it had been protected by an invisible rule. The particles scattered silently across the table. Byung immediately noticed the disturbance. He looked over, catching sight of the leftover powder, and stared at Dokja with suspicion. Even though Dokja pretended nothing had happened, the dokkaebi sighed, clearly annoyed. Then Byung asked a question, not about the paper, but something heavier. He wanted to know if things were really going to be okay. There was doubt in his voice. Perhaps it was the weight of everything that had just happened. Perhaps it was regret. He brought up the constellations again, the ones who had joined using the method Dokja suggested. Byung warned that those constellations wouldn't stay long. Once they left, they would return to Dogak's Tokyo Dome channel, and when that happened, Dogak's revenge would begin. But Dokja remained calm. That concern could wait for another day. Byung's worries grew deeper. He reminded Dokja of the bold claim he made earlier. If the channel reached 10,000 subscribers, Dokja promised to choose a constellation as his partner. But that number was climbing fast, already past 5,000. And then Byung brought up a major point. When Dokja signed the contract with him, there had been a rule. He wasn't allowed to choose a sponsor, so how could he say such a thing? Still, Dokja didn't press further. He said he already had an idea in mind, and that Byung didn't need to worry. Then he asked for the reward, the item that should now be his. With Dogak gone, it was time to collect. Byung, slightly flustered, finally moved to manipulate the system. He took the coat and accepted it without another word. Then Byung said it was time to return. With a flick of his fingers, the dokkaebi shifted reality. The walls of the dokkaebi's realm dissolved instantly. He appeared out of thin air, landing in front of Sanga and Soo-young without warning. Soo-young jumped back, clearly startled by his sudden arrival. As soon as Dokja returned, Soo-young ran up to him, her face filled with both concern and irritation. She demanded to know where he had been all this time. Dokja casually replied that he had just been taking care of some things. Soo-young's eyes quickly moved to the coat he was now wearing. She raised an eyebrow at the new outfit and made a sarcastic comment about the coat's fancy design, even joking about whether he and someone else had planned to wear matching clothes. Dokja responded calmly. He explained that the design was common and that he had actually wanted the black version, but even though he hadn't gotten his first first choice, he didn't complain. His attention then turned to Jung-hyuk, who was still unconscious. Dokja examined him quietly. From the looks of it, Jung-hyuk was recovering, and there didn't seem to be anything to worry about immediately. But even so, Dokja decided it was best to leave before Jung-hyuk woke up. He told Soo-young they should get out of there. With that, Dokja left Gangdong-gu, accompanied by Soo-young. Senga was still unconscious from exhaustion, and Soo-young's avatar gently carried her as they moved. Dokja returned to the battlefield where they had once fought Antinous, hoping to find Lycan, but the place was empty. There was no sign of Lycan's body, which meant he had survived. However, Dokja couldn't understand why Lycan hadn't come to him. The only explanation was that the hatching disaster had injured him badly. Not long after, Dokja's stomach growled. He scanned the area for something to eat and pointed toward a plant growing along a tall building. It looked strange but seemed edible. Soo-young was skeptical. She questioned whether that kind of plant could really be eaten. She looked at Dokja as if he were crazy for even considering it, but he reminded her they had no other choice. There was no food left. They cut the stems and tentacles of the plant, a species called Yanaspleta. As it disconnected from its roots, the plant seemed to shut down, closing its eyes as if falling asleep. Dokja quickly began preparing the food, following the instructions he had once read in Ways of Survival. As the Yanaspleta cooked, a delicious smell began to rise into the air. Soo-young's attitude shifted the moment she caught the scent. Her disbelief turned to curiosity, then to hunger. She stared at the food and remarked how surprisingly good it smelled. Dokja told her to wait a little longer. Before eating, she had to drink the sap he had boiled from the plant's roots. It was an important step in making the Yanaspleta safe to eat. Soo-young eyed the soup suspiciously but took a cautious sip. Dokja reminded her again, drinking the sap was necessary before eating the stem. After tasting the soup, she bit into the food. Her reaction changed completely. The moment the flavors hit her mouth, it was as if a child had discovered their favorite meal. As Soo-young continued eating, she couldn't hold back her amazement. The food tasted far better than she had expected. Her sarcastic tone had faded, replaced with genuine delight. She even joked that Dokja could probably open his own restaurant, but she was eating too fast, and Dokja, watching her stuff her face, told her to slow down. In between bites, Soo-young brought up something serious. She asked if it was really safe to leave Jung-hyuk behind with that woman, Solwa. She referred to her as the Poison Beauty, clearly unsure if she could be trusted. Dokja paused and thought back to the earlier moment with Solwa. He had asked her to take Jung-hyuk to Gaebongdong. There she would find the military base of the 5,603rd Division. At that location, a sad-looking soldier would be waiting to help her. Dokja had made that decision based on what he knew. In the other timelines, during Jung-hyuk's past regressions, Solwa hadn't always been infected. In those cases, she wasn't called the Poison Beauty. Instead, people had known her as the Sage of Medicine. Dokja hoped that in this round, she would reclaim that title again. Returning to the present, Dokja responded to Soo-young's concern. He said that Solwa wasn't truly evil. The reason for her strange behavior was the parasite controlling her. Deep down, she was still the person she used to be. As Dokja shifted his gaze, his eyes fell on Senga. She was lying nearby, still unconscious, or at least pretending to be. He spoke to her, saying that he knew she was awake and invited her to join them and eat, but there was no response. Senga murmured something under her breath, too faint to hear. Dokja teased her, saying there wouldn't be any food left for her if she didn't get up soon. He picked up a piece of food and exclaimed how one part tasted just like short ribs. That was enough to break through her stubbornness. Senga suddenly sat up, her eyes wide with surprise. As he expected, the smell of food had finally lured her back to reality. Dokja turned toward Soo-young again and mentioned that if she was done eating, she should get up. Soo-young frowned and questioned why, but Dokja didn't answer directly. He gave her a knowing look, hinting that he saw through her act. Soo-young was pretending to be fine, pretending to be playful, but her temper and sharp wit always gave her away. He didn't have to spell it out. Soo-young responded with her usual wicked grin, her eyes glancing playfully at Senga. Meanwhile, Senga was grinding her teeth in frustration, clearly irritated by Soo-young's smirk. Soo-young finally stood up, brushing herself off with a scoff. Her expression showed her usual irritation, but it was mixed with subtle care. She muttered that Dokja was annoying and announced she would go for a walk. Before leaving, she asked him to save her some food for later. Then she walked off into the distance, leaving a brief silence behind her. Senga, who had just started eating, slowly bit into one of the skewers. Seeing her eat like that brought a smile to Dokja's face. He laughed gently, telling her not to rush. Senga admitted how delicious the food was. That simple comment struck something deep within Dokja. Watching her now, he could tell this was still the same Senga he once knew. Even after everything, she hadn't disappeared. A month had already passed since the world had collapsed into chaos, and in that time, so much had changed. The woman who once disliked violence, who couldn't even bear the thought of hurting someone, now carried daggers in each hand. Then Senga spoke softly, her voice trembled. She asked a question that didn't need an answer. She wondered aloud if they could ever go back to how things used to be. As she said it, the hand that had just been soaked in someone else's blood slowly moved up to cover her eyes. Her shoulders trembled, though she tried hard not to let any sound escape. escape. Dokja told her it wasn't her fault. He didn't know if his words would bring her comfort, but it was all he could offer. That moment broke her. Senga started to cry. Her quiet tears fell down her cheeks, one after the other. Dokja didn't know, but slowly, little by little, her sobbing began to fade. There was only a week left before the 5th scenario began. Dokja looked back at what he had achieved so far. He had managed to defeat the catastrophe from the flaming depths of hell, the fire dragon, and he had also taken down the catastrophe of questions Ilseng. Now Junghyuk would wake up soon, and he and Lee Hyunsung would take care of the west. The King of Wanderers was handling the north. All that remained was the catastrophe in the center. But before that, Dokja sat in silence. The ruined city was filled with distant sounds, eerie cries of monsters roaming in the dark. It felt like he was talking to himself in that empty world. He looked over at Senga again and quietly asked if she was going to keep pretending, but by then, Senga had already fallen back asleep. Dokja spoke aloud, knowing that someone was watching, someone who had been keeping a close eye on him from the shadows. His voice was calm but sharp. He wasn't guessing anymore. If the one watching had truly been observing him for long, then they would already know what he had done. Dokja had used the stem of the Janus Bleda without its sap. This specific plant had a unique trait. If consumed without drinking its sap first, it would cause unconsciousness. It was a subtle trap, and now Senga lay still, her body showing no resistance. But this wasn't over yet. The white blade of Unbroken Faith gleamed as he slowly lowered it toward her throat. There was no hesitation in his movements. Blood began to emerge, painting a thin red line along her skin. His voice was steady as he warned that he was willing to do anything to achieve his goal. If the being hiding inside her didn't come out soon, they might lose their precious incarnation. Just a centimeter away from piercing deeper, Dokja waited. Then, it happened. In a blink, Senga's eyes flashed with unnatural light. A violent gust of wind exploded outward, slamming Dokja's body away from her with a force that numbed his limbs. A suffocating pressure filled the air, a divine presence that made his chest heavy and breath short. A faint glow surrounded Senga's body, shimmering like a barrier. The atmosphere shifted entirely. A system notification rang in Dokja's mind. His exclusive skill, Fourth Wall, had activated, shielding him from mental collapse. Through his blurred vision, Dokja looked at Senga again. Her eyes no longer seemed human. Within them spun the faint shadow of a nebula, an endless galaxy twisting deep within her pupils. And then, like thunder striking directly into his consciousness, a voice roared inside his head. The presence had revealed itself. Dokja wiped the blood from his mouth. Despite the pain, he smirked. At last, they had come. The constellations from Olympus. In the world of ways of survival, constellations were divided into two kinds. Some were free beings, wandering through the scenarios without any allegiance. Others were part of organized factions, nebulae. Among these were names known across Earth: Asgard from Norse mythology, Eden from biblical tales, and Olympus from Greek legend. Senga's constellation belonged to Olympus. Her body stood tall, but it was no longer her voice. A different will spoke through her, filled with fury. The entity was furious that a mere human had dared to threaten a divine incarnation, that someone like Dokja had mocked the gods. But Dokja wasn't fazed. He laughed bitterly and spoke back without fear. In his mind, he had already made up his mind about these so-called gods. They weren't true deities, just beings clinging to myths and stories. The Olympian presence hesitated as if embarrassed by his words, but Dokja continued, unrelenting. He reminded them of the scenario rules, the iron laws of plausibility that governed the early stages of this world. The current scenario didn't permit full descent of high-ranking constellations like those from Olympus, and Dokja knew that very well. Ariadne's voice rang out in disbelief, filled with confusion and fury. She couldn't understand how Dokja was able to face her with such confidence, but Dokja already knew the reason. Under the strict rules of plausibility that governed this scenario, only one constellation had been allowed to descend through Senga's body, and that one was Ariadne, the historical constellation from the nebula of Olympus, known as the Lover of the Labyrinth. Her presence here revealed something deeper. Olympus, despite its grandeur, had been cautious. They had chosen to send a lesser-ranked constellation to conserve their resources. Ariadne had a lower plausibility cost, making her descent possible. Dokja calmly analyzed the situation. He understood the limitations she faced. Ariadne might be strong, with threads of magic swirling around her that tore into the earth and cracked the ground beneath her feet. But her power wasn't limitless. The descent through Senga had already consumed a large amount of plausibility. If she used more power now, it would cost Olympus dearly. She couldn't afford it. Even with her threatening presence, Dokja stood unfazed. He spoke again, acknowledging that time was short and Ariadne wouldn't have long before she was pulled back. He also warned her. Other gods had already noticed her presence. Her arrival hadn't gone unnoticed by the powerful forces of other dimensions. Ariadne paused, stunned that a human could know so much. But Dokja wasn't interested in dragging out the conversation. He cut straight to the point. He proposed a formal exchange of questions, something known as a three-question exchange. It was a practice used by constellations to trade valuable information without triggering large plausibility costs. Ariadne stared at him with suspicion. For a human to use a constellation's own rules so fluently was unheard of. Still, she had little choice. Dokja was right. She hadn't come just to argue. She agreed. System notifications flickered into view. One in particular stood out. A constellation who disliked spoilers had taken interest in Dokja's bold proposal. The moment the divine presence of Olympus fully revealed itself, Ariadne's eyes snapped open. Her connection with her nebula had been completed. The rules of the divine three-question exchange were officially activated. Both sides were now bound to a system of strict fairness. Each allowed 3 questions and 3 answers. One refusal was permitted to each party, but the exchange would not conclude until the remaining questions were fully answered with honesty. Dokja didn't hesitate. He immediately asked his first question. He wanted to know why Ariadne had taken over Senga's body. Olympus was based on the other side of the world. Why would a constellation so far removed from this scenario interfere now, especially when their own regional scenarios were still active? Ariadne answered without hesitation. Her purpose was to observe the singularity of this world. The word struck Dokja, singularity. That term held weight. He asked for clarification, but Ariadne, not missing a beat, reminded him that asking for more would count as his second question. Dokja backed off. It was now her turn. Ariadne looked directly at Dokja and asked who he truly was. Dokja replied casually, claiming that he was the very singularity they had been observing. Stunned by his answer, Ariadne shot back, demanding to know how he knew that. Dokja chuckled playfully, admitting he had only been guessing, and now she had confirmed it. Frustrated, Ariadne muttered under her breath. She hadn't expected him to turn the situation around so effortlessly. Internally, Dokja remained calm and focused. He knew how these divine exchanges worked. The key was to ask the most valuable questions during your own turn, and to bait the opponent into squandering theirs. It wasn't just about trading information. It was a battle of control, a battle of insight. The 3-question exchange continued, and it was Dokja's turn again. Without wasting time, he asked his second question. He wanted to know what Ariadne meant by singularity. A vague label wasn't enough. He needed something concrete. Ariadne responded. She explained that singularities referred to beings like Dokja and others who appeared in the oracles. In truth, Olympus hadn't intended to monitor him specifically. Their original goal was to watch something else. But as they observed the flow of events, Dokja and others like him emerged. People who defied logic and scenario structure, ones who disrupted plausibility itself. These were the true singularities, beings who carried the burden of great destinies and warped the natural course of events. As Dokja listened, he silently reflected. The explanation made sense now. A singularity wasn't just someone strong, it was someone whose existence shook the very foundation of the scenarios. Then Ariadne claimed her turn and asked a question he didn't expect. She wanted to know who he would choose in the upcoming support selection. The question was too direct, too dangerous. He immediately refused to answer. Giving away his choice would spoil his plans. Ariadne moved on to her third and final question, and this time it was a calculated strike. She asked how Dokja had known that Olympus had been watching him. This was what they were truly after. If she had asked about his identity, he could have dodged the answer, but now the question was specific and cornered him. He paused, then gave a lighthearted reply. He claimed that he simply read a lot of books. Ariadne was stunned. The answer caught her off guard, but the system didn't confirm it as a valid response. That meant his answer hadn't been convincing enough. Dokja realized he had to follow up, but without exposing the truth about ways of survival. After a quick moment to think, Dokja gave a new answer. He explained that in Korea, people were well versed in Olympus mythology. The gods of Olympus were so famous that even children read comics about them. That widespread cultural familiarity could easily explain why he knew so much about them. Ariadne looked visibly shaken. Despite her status as a historical constellation, she was struggling to stay composed. Her voice trembled as she tried to deny the possibility that someone from a small country like Korea could know about her story. But Dokja didn't let up. He calmly began to recite her tale, mentioning the Cretan labyrinth, the monstrous Minotaur, her forgotten lover left behind on Naxos Island, and even her relationship with an Olympian god. With each word, Ariadne grew more terrified. Cold sweat rolled down her face. The sky itself responded with thunderous roars. The atmosphere trembled as though the heavens were reacting to the truths being spoken aloud. Dokja stared at her and warned that he could go on if needed. That was enough. Ariadne, overwhelmed, pleaded for him to stop. She could no longer hide her fear. Her voice cracked as she asked how someone like him could know her ancient fable. It shook her deeply. This man, bound by human limitations, somehow knew what should have remained buried in myth. Then came Dokja's final question. He asked about the oracle Ariadne had received, the prophecy that had likely guided her actions. But as expected, Ariadne refused to answer. The most critical question had been left unresolved. Dokja had hoped to learn something valuable, but she invoked her right to skip a question. The system immediately responded, confirming that all questions and answers had been exchanged. The divine 3-question exchange had officially ended. A faint regret echoed from the system, hinting that even some constellations were disappointed by the missed opportunity. Ariadne's gaze shifted upward. Lightning crackled across the sky. Her expression turned stern as she addressed Dokja one last time. She made it clear that she had only tolerated this exchange because her husband had shown interest in Dokja, but her patience had run out. Her voice became cold and final. She declared that there was only one reason she had descended to this world: to deliver a warning from Olympus. Olympus had no intention of allowing interference. They claimed to be working to prevent the end of the world. According to Ariadne, the woman whose body she had taken, Senga, would be the barrier that holds back the wave of destruction. Dokja, still confused, wondered aloud why Senga of all people had been chosen. But Ariadne didn't offer a clear reason. She simply stated that even the three sisters who weave fate do not know. Everything, she claimed, was part of a predetermined path. Dokja grew frustrated. Olympus always used fate as an excuse, refusing to give straight answers. Ariadne then turned to him one last time, calling him an incarnation trapped by scenarios. But things were changing, she said. Fate itself was turning, and all the stars would begin to gather in one place. A great story was about to unfold, one that would decide the destiny of the constellations. Dokja asked what she meant. Was she referring to the Gigantomachia? Ariadne's expression briefly changed. She seemed almost impressed that he knew even that. Olympus had been watching him closely, yet he continued to surprise them with how much he knew. The sparks that danced violently around Senga's body were growing unstable. They had reached their peak. Ariadne, using Senga's voice, gave a final warning. She claimed that Dokja could never truly understand, as he was just a puppet caught in the moment. She hinted at a choice he would have to make when the time came, a choice about which side to stand on. Then, without warning, a massive bolt of lightning struck Senga. The moment the lightning touched her body, the overwhelming power that had filled her started to vanish. Ariadne's presence was being torn away. The air around them cracked, as if space and time themselves were being ripped apart. Senga's body, no longer supported by divine power, collapsed like a lifeless puppet. Dokja rushed forward and caught her before she hit the ground. As he held her, a chill crawled down his spine. He could feel a gaze, an immense and terrifying one, watching him from above. He didn't need to be told not to look. Something deep within him screamed that if he dared to raise his head, it would shatter his very being. A system message appeared. His exclusive skill, Fourth Wall, had protected his mind from the mental shock. Even then, fear lingered. He dared to look up just once. In the vast sky above the Great Hole, something unnatural had appeared. It was a presence that defied form, possibly a tongue or a tentacle, but even that description was meaningless. It was a terror that couldn't be explained through language. It didn't belong to this world. It was a god, but not one from Olympus or any known myth. This was something older, something alien, a being from another world. Time seemed to stop. Every second stretched endlessly. Sweat drenched Dokja's face and back. His breathing grew heavy. The pain in the air was sharp and invisible. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the presence disappeared and the Great Hole returned to its normal distant form. But the damage had been done. Dokja trembled. This was the kind of being he would have to face. In the distance, he saw Suyong running toward him. Around them, chaos unfolded. Monsters were roaring in confusion. The sky crackled with lightning. Screams of humans echoed as they were struck down by the storm. Thoughts raced through Dokja's mind. Several scenarios related to the world's end existed: Ragnarok, Gigantomachia, Armageddon. Ariadne had spoken of something, but he wasn't sure which ending she meant. All he knew was that this was not the same story he once read. Something had changed, and that change was exactly what he needed. If everything followed the original novel, then he would never reach the ending he truly desired. He couldn't allow the story to repeat. This time, he would write a story powerful enough to rival any myth. Then the system responded. Deep within his soul, the power of a fable stirred. Something ancient and new was awakening. His first stigma, his own unique mark, was about to bloom. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.